Okay, we're good. Good evening. I call to order the special meeting of the Victoria City Council for Monday, December 16th at 6 p.m. Because it's a special meeting, the agenda is slightly different. Nonetheless, it's not on here, but without objection, I think we should do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes.
Right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thanks. One other item. It's not on the agenda. Without objections, though, Dana's asked that I read a few announcements. Council, any objections?
Nope.
Okay. Real quick, there will be a public open house on December 17th from 5:30 to 7:30 for the Arboretum Area Transportation Plan, Highway 5 in the at the Arboretum. There's also a public open house scheduled for December 19th from 5 to 7 p.m. for the County Road 10 corridor in the Chaska Community Center. We encourage residents to attend both houses. This evening also marks the last meeting of the year for the Victoria City Council. The next regularly scheduled council meeting will be Monday, January 13th at 6:30 p.m., and it's the city's annual organizational meeting. We'll also be taking time in that meeting to recognize and thank our volunteers who help the city deliver its programs and services. There'll be a city council workshop on Monday, January 27th at 5:30 to talk about our 2020 legislative priorities. And unless otherwise noted, all meetings of the city council take place here at City Hall, in the council chambers, and of course, you're all invited to attend. And finally, on behalf of the city council, we would like to wish our staff, residents, and businesses a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and the warmest and best holiday wishes. And that concludes the announcements. So,
Question, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
The meeting at the Arboretum, which building is it in?
Dana, do we know?
The main building.
Kara in the
Big
back says
auditorium.
the main building.
So
big
the
auditorium.
McMillan or the Snyder? McMillan?
McMillan, that's the first building.
It's my auditorium.
Yes.
All right, for those that couldn't hear, it's the McMillan building, right? So, Deb, when did you build a building over there?
It's lovely. You should be, please come to the McMillan Auditorium. It's quite lovely.
Okay, announcements. Is county attorney here? So we're assuming he got delayed, so first off, let's start off with, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second, please.
Second motion.
Discussion? Just real quick, the first item is County Attorney Mark Metz. He's not here yet. I'm assuming he's delayed. So we'll adopt the agenda, and without objection from the council, we'll fit him in as soon as he arrives as the next item. Go ahead.
And then we have that, the last 3.10, the approved amended employee agreement with city manager Dana Hardy. It's on the agenda, it just wasn't, it was added on today.
Yes.
So it's
Okay.
part of this agenda.
All right, we'll get to that when we get to the consent agenda.
Oh, sorry. Well,
So, that's all right. That's all right. So we have a valid motion. That's second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the agenda is adopted. Dana, just a quick administrative note. The consent agenda typically comes before we handle the actual agenda items. Is this just a template issue? Because the consent agenda is here at the end.
Yes, Mayor, that's a template. It's just
Doesn't
how
matter.
it was set up in our system, and we didn't catch it, so.
All right, so not a problem. So because we usually do the consent agenda, let's just take care of that now, since the city attorney isn't here. So at this point, can I get a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I make a motion that we adopt the consent agenda.
Second, please.
Second.
All right, and just one more time, the original packet did not have 3.10 included in it. That was added in. Is that correct, Cindy? Yep. So if anybody has any questions about that, contact city staff. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is adopted. With that, we'll go back to the item 2.1. Since the county attorney isn't here, let's move on to 2.2. We'll come back to 2.1 when the county attorney gets here. With that, this is adopt the final levy budget in 2020 to 2024 capital improvement plan. With that, Trish?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I have an overview of what we've discussed in detail at previous meetings and workshops for the 2020 final levy budget and CIP adoption. So tonight we're just going to review, and then we'll have a discussion, and then there are some resolutions prepared for adoption. So first off, this chart just shows what funds we have budgeted for and are included in this budget adoption this evening. And going over our process, we are now at the final stage in December after 6 months of reviewing and working and making changes and refining. This evening is the final. So to review the general fund budget, we had revenues of 5.949 in the budget, and expenditures are at 4.662. Our transfers are at 1.222. And there is a contribution at the end of the year at $64,518 in order to reach the 2020 ending unassigned fund balance of 1.463. That's to meet the 30% of the next year's expenditures, which meets the city policy of 30%. This is just a quick review of the general fund budgeted transfers. The water fund loan coming off in 2020 as that was paid for. The long-term street maintenance fund is the highest change in the budget transfers. And also we had the new park fund transfer at $100,000.
I had a question on that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Of course.
That large transfer for street maintenance, is that because 2019 was abnormally low and we're bringing it back to the normal level?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. It's to catch up. It was reduced last year to cut back on some of the budget. So this is kind of a catch up for that.
And the 64,000 to get to the 30% fund balance?
Yep.
Where does that come from?
So that's just that's the ending balance of between revenues and expenditures at the end of the year. That's how much
Okay, so
we
that's
would
just-
have to have extra over in order to meet that 30%.
Right, but where are you transferring it from?
So it would come through the levy.
Okay.
It would be a revenue in the levy in order to have enough cash balance to meet that 30%.
So it's a line item.
It's like a line item, correct? Yeah. So the final levy did not change from the preliminary max tax that was done in September. So it stayed at the 13.1%. So the proposed final levy is for 5.896. That includes that EDA HRA levy that was just approved prior to this meeting. This graph just shows the levy history from 2009. It's typical for a growing city to see the levy increase to cover operating expenses. The tax impact, as you can see here, the tax rate did go down slightly. That's because the fiscal disparities number came in a little bit higher than anticipated, and we get that pretty late in the year. So the 0.3% would be due to that. And the median home value change was coming in at $1,411 tax on a median home. This just kind of shows how that $1,411 is calculated, showing the taxable market value for the median home. The 1% is the amount that of tax that the city could tax up to. And then the rate the city is going to tax would be the 32.1%. So it's basically 32.1% of the 1%.
So 0.3%.
Yes.
Is our tax rate.
Right. So this is the tax levy increase in comparison to our market cities, with Victoria being at the 13.1% increase. These can vary quite a bit depending on what increases cities had the prior years. Also, growing cities typically will see higher levy increases from year to year. There's quite a few factors that go into play with these. But this is what the preliminaries were for our market cities. Now, what they finalized at, we don't, of course, have that information. This was their max taxes. And then the rec center budget, we're showing an ending fund balance out just over $1 million. There is about 50,000 in decrease, but that's all due to a capital outlay planned expense for some security and locker room upgrades. There is enough cash balance in the rec center fund to do the projects that we have for maintenance, upcoming maintenance for future years.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we keep that fund balance.
You must have some doozies in there.
There's, some roofs and, quite a few things that are down the road, but yet we're going to keep cash on hand to be able to pay for those, because that way then we can still meet that debt service payment and not have to transfer from the general fund. And then the water fund budget, an ending cash balance of $841,000. This could change given what projects out of the CIP end up going, because we're planning to pay cash for those projects that we had planned for the water fund. We will look at the water fund coming up here in the CIP. So if you have specific questions about any of those projects, we can talk about them.
The expenses, though, must be, is the well in there? The 2.5?
Yeah, so we've got the well and the pump house in there. The 2.5 is done, it would be well 5.
So
that we'd be
what's in
looking
the
at.
3.6, well, 5?
So the CIP for the water fund is right here. So we would have the well number 5 at 1.3, and then the south area extension at 570,000. So those are the two big ones. And then the sewer fund, ending cash balance expected to be at $796,000. Again, expenses here, higher for the capital projects that may or may not happen in 2020. The non-operating revenues are reflecting a bonding of $2 million towards the South Area project if that were to go. So that's where the $2,470,000 portion would offset quite a bit of those expenses. And then the stormwater fund, we don't have any capital projects planned. There was a $2 per quarter increase in the rates for the stormwater, trying to build up some cash balances for future pond cleanings and dredgings, maintenance. And then we'll go into the capital improvement plan for the 5-year plan. Again, projects costing over $10,000 will come to council. So this does not mean automatic approval. the items that we have included are in the budget. And we do have in the long-term financial plan adequate funding for those projects. So the general fund capital improvements, there are not any currently for 2020. So there's a couple of things out there for 2021. And then the public works for 2020, we've got a pickup, a dump truck, and a sidewalk machine planned. Transfers from the general fund from prior years, and this year will cover those expenses, but they will again come to council before their purchase. On the fire truck, the mini pumper that was prepaid for this year, so we'll be getting that next year. The park fund, we've got Wassermann Park slated in there. That would be bonds paid with franchise fee revenues. Paving the Lions Park parking lot would come from the park fund and a portion from the charitable gambling fund. And then the trail gaps, the $550,000 in 2021 and then $25,000 for 2020 is the Bavaria Trail connection that Ann had put in for one of the first trails to be on the slate for that, to use those funds.
Council hasn't decided which trails to do first, though.
And that's the other, this is just what staff has, or the Park and Rec Committee has recommended, and of course it will all, again, be approved by council before anything is done.
All right, thank you.
And then the downtown redevelopment for the old public works site, using the TIF pooling money for making a parking lot improvement in that area and some upgrade to sidewalks to be ADA compliant. And then the streets, we got the Marsh Lake Road improvements. The street extension to Marsh Lake would be a part of that south area project, and then the Steiger Lake Lane West improvements. The long-term street maintenance fund, council recently talked about the PED crossing improvements on County Road 11, which may have some funding from the county, and some street overlays, and the 11, 18, and 43 intersection improvements that would be coming out of the long-term street maintenance fund. And then the sewer fund capital projects include grinder pumps for lift station 8, some upgrades to lift station 18. We've got the south area sewer improvement portion and a lift station 11, and then the oversizing of trunk main for future developments, if there are any. And water is the portable generator, the trunk main oversizing, and the south area extension, and then the well 5. So the long-term financial plan is also in the agenda packet for 2020 to 2029. We go farther out than that, but that's the portion that we're showing and having you consider this evening. It meets the council plans and goals of maintaining the flat tax rate and also maintaining or improving service levels. And the 30% general fund unassigned balance is included. There's less than 1.5% tax-supported debt of market values, and debt service portion of the levy is less than 30% of the total levy. Details of the current budget and levy are also included, and levies for the general fund debt service are projected. Debt issuance, it shows current and future debt service payments, and we're forecasting for a number of new homes at 111 a year, market value growth being 2.5% per year, inflation at 3%, and also including additional staff and equipment that we know will be needed. The capital improvement plan is also included in the long-term financial plan. So long-term projections show the tax on the medium value home does go up mostly because of the increase in the market value. And the tax rate is holding pretty steady. Actually, it fluctuates down a little bit towards the end there, but all in all, it stays pretty steady. So now, is there any questions that you have, things you'd like to discuss?
Council? No?
I'm good.
We've been studying this for months.
Yes, we have.
Can we get the resolutions up then, please?
Are they way at the end, probably? Oh, here's one.
Okay, how many resolutions are there related to
I
the
think there's
four?
4,
Okay,
yeah.
can I get a motion for the first resolution, please?
I make a motion to approve a resolution approving the final tax levy for the city of Victoria for collection in 2020.
Thank you. Second, please.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next resolution, please. Can I get a motion, please?
Oh, sorry.
Keeps jumping all over here.
Make a motion to approve a resolution adopting the final 2020 general fund and Victoria Recreation Center fund budgets.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next resolution, please. Thank you. Motion, please.
I make a motion that we adopt a resolution adopting the final 2020 water fund, sewer fund, and stormwater fund budgets.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second motion.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Last one. I make a motion for a resolution adopting the 2020 to 24 capital improvement plan.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right. Was that it, Trish? Those four?
That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this point, the county attorney is here, so let's go back and do item 2.1. County Attorney Mark Metz, opioids and Carver County Drug Court. Just for the record, if you will, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Mark Metz, Carver County Attorney, appearing before you. I apologize, I'm a little late, but I was waiting in the parking lot. I thought we started at 6:30, so my apologies. So tonight, I wanted to go through our annual prosecution contract presentation, but I also appreciate the time that you're giving me to talk about our Carver County Drug Court and maybe talk a little bit, follow up with our last discussion about opioid abuse. I know I presented with our public health manager, so I will go pretty quickly unless you want me to slow down and place emphasis on our prosecution contracts because I've been here before. I don't think there are any surprises to that. But I wanted to emphasize a few things, and I don't know if they have, did they have the PowerPoint or up they were going to put up or not? And that's fine if they don't. No?
Did we
Okay.
get a power? We didn't get one?
I didn't receive a PowerPoint.
Okay, all right. Well, that's not necessary anyway, but as you know, the county attorney's office has 34 employees in our office and 18 lawyers, and we prosecute all felonies by statute for every city. So all 11 cities in the county, we prosecute for them by statute, but the other cities can contract with our office to prosecute petty misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors. We're talking about speeding tickets, DUIs, assaults. And so 10 of 11 cities contract with our office. Chanhassen's the only one that contracts with a private law firm, and we feel we offer a great service to all the cities, coordination, collaboration with our office, with the sheriff's office, and with our victim witness coordination team, which is now made up of 2 full-time victim witness coordinators. So we were able to get a grant a couple years ago, and now we're fully funding that. So we're excited about that, and it allows us to provide a high level of service that we continue. So just to highlight, what we go through in terms of determining the costs is we take a 3-year average of the number of cases that we handle for each city. So it can fluctuate from year to year, and it does, because some years we do a little bit more, some years we do a little bit less. So this year, the average actually went up for the city of Victoria, and we handled 108 cases in 2018 as opposed to 79 in 2017 and 70 the year before. So I don't know what that trend is, but we take that average and basically we compare that to the other cities, and that determines the rate. Now, on top of that, we add a surcharge, which is essentially consistent with the county's increases, which for 2020 is 3.68%. So what we're proposing and what I would ask the council to approve is that the contract for 2020 would be $8,871.82. So that's up a little bit from the year before at $82.27, almost a 10% increase, but again, that's just because of the number of cases that we prosecuted. So I don't have anything further on that because I wanted to save my time for the drug court presentation, and I don't know if anybody has any questions about the prosecution contracts, but I'd be happy to answer those.
Council, any questions?
None.
Rock and roll.
Okay, great. So you've probably seen and heard a lot about substance abuse courts, alternative courts, and I'm excited to announce here, and it's been in the paper, that Carver County received a $500,000 grant for 4 years to start a drug court. And this was an extensive process. Our office applied for the grant, and we started way back in April, and we had to have the team attend a week-long training with federal trainers. We had to go through every single protocol. Highly bureaucratic, but necessary. It's a federal grant, and we were awarded this $500,000 to start our program. There was $98 million nationwide. I think there were 18 grants for drug court, and 5 of them were granted in the state of Minnesota. So we were one of those. So we're going to begin our drug court on January 13th of 2020. We're ready to go, and we have everything in place essentially, and we're excited to start this alternative court. So what is drug court? We hear this, or substance abuse court. Well, it's a treatment court that's very similar to our veterans court that we started and has been successful, and it's really a shift in how we're handling substance abuse cases. You have your traditional avenue of you get charged with a drug crime, you go to court, you have your bail hearing or first appearance and your omnibus hearing, and you plead guilty, or you have a trial, or you're found not guilty. But if you plead guilty, which are the 98% of cases, you go down through the traditional path, which is probation, and you get treatment, and you have conditions, and you have a fine, and you have consequences, and then you're monitored. But those are with mixed results. So what drug court does is it actually targets high-risk, high-needs offenders. And that was something a little bit different for me to get used to, because it surprised me a little bit. Really? We're going to have these serious offenders in the program? Well, everything we do is evidence-based. So we look at other programs that have been successful. We look at the evidence of what works, and it's proven that these are the individuals you want to target, because you don't want a little low-level offender that has a small amount of methamphetamines. You're actually looking for someone with higher needs and is a higher risk. And it's a pre-plea court, which means we don't take a plea of guilty, and we wait until the end. And so the benefit to the person that is in our court is that they may have a reduced charge at the end of the program if they're successful. They may get the case dismissed. That's probably unlikely, but there'll be some reduction in the sentence. It's not a get out of jail free card like vets court. It's actually more intensive. It's more difficult, but it's proven to be successful. So they have frequent drug and alcohol testing, absolutely essential, right? That this is done more frequently than traditional probation. Frequent court appearances. Every Monday, they'll appear in court. The judge will take time with each individual and say, how are things going? They meet before with the team, and they talk about all the people that are in the court and see how they're progressing, what do they need, and then they bring them into court. And the judge has this interaction, and it's proven that if a judge spends time, even 3 minutes with each participant, it makes a significant difference of holding them accountable and getting them the needs. And then it treats substance abuse and mental health. And that's critical because they're often intertwined, that they're self-medicating. So we've connected them with we will connect them with the treatment programs for substance abuse, but also for the mental health, that they can address that. We are going to have a capacity of 25 people. We want to keep it limited to that, and that's again proven to be the number that you should be targeting. Drug court celebrating 30 years this year in the United States, and there's currently just about 3,500 drug courts in the United States, and the average savings per participant is $6,000. Again, this is all from the statistics that are gathered that we're going to have to gather and send to the federal government to receive this grant as well.
6,000 over the more traditional method and path?
Yeah, exactly. So it's shown to save money, but it's also reduced recidivism by 58%. So that's, again, according to these statistics, which is proven to work. And I think somebody that comes from a background of that they're in the system for a long period of time, and I've been a prosecutor since 1998. So virtually my entire career, too. You have the traditional way of doing things. But it made me think about it as the county attorney. We need to think of different ways that we're handling these types of cases. And that's not to say that it was wrong the way we handled other cases and things like that, but something's not working. And so let's look at what might work, but it takes an incredible amount of collaboration and teamwork. Because this isn't a matter of us getting 6 more employees. It's a matter of the employees, as you all know, doing more because they care and they want to reduce the recidivism, and it saves money ultimately as well. So the drug court team is made up of a judge. So the Honorable Michael Wenzel is the go-to judge. Judge Kane is our go-to judge for Vets Court. And we have a prosecutor in our office, defense counsel, treatment team provider, North Star Regional, James Johnson. We will be hiring a treatment court coordinator that we're going to use for the grant money, and that's important to coordinate everything. Community supervision representative. We have a law enforcement commander in the sheriff's office who will be there and is essential. And we have an evaluator from our office, my executive assistant, Rhonda Betcher, who's going to be working on the team as well. So how does this help Carver County? How does it help Victoria and all the cities? It improves public safety because we're reducing recidivism. And it saves taxpayer dollars where fewer individuals are incarcerated. We looked at a jail per diem as almost $200. So per person per diem, that's what it costs. So that's going to be reduced. Now, they'll go to jail. They'll have consequences when they come in, and let's say the judge finds that they tested positive over the weekend to a drug. They'll bring them in, and there could be consequences, and likely will be. You're going to get 2 days in jail. You're going to get 5 days in jail, and it's usually immediate, and that's what's proven to work. And then also find out what happened. Let's talk about this, and you had a relapse, and so it really is about working for each individual and trying to find a way through accountability, but also that treatment source. And then drug use reduction, relapse prevention, and try to reduce, ultimately the use and deaths. From 2015 to 2018, Carver County had 20 drug-related deaths. And our office is prosecuting a number of those cases. We have active investigations. They're third-degree murder cases, and they're where an individual sells or provides a drug. Unfortunately, it's usually heroin that's laced with fentanyl, and there's an overdose. And So unfortunately, we've had too many of those. We've had 72,000 deaths on average in the United States for opioids. I mean, 72,000 people in Carver County. You look at those numbers of 2015 to 2018 of 20 deaths from drug overdoses. But in looking at the statistics, alcohol is still the number one drug that's intertwined with our criminal justice system. 48% of the cases that we prosecute are related to alcohol. 25% are related to methamphetamines. So we don't hear as much about meth, but it's still prominent. It's prevalent in Carver County, and it doesn't lead to as many fatalities, but it is an insidious drug as well. And then marijuana is 17%, heroin 6%, and cocaine's 4%. But again, heroin's a big issue because it can lead to overdoses.
Do you consider the alcohol as with the drug court as well?
No, that's not. That will not be in our drug court, in our substance abuse court. They do have some, alcohol substance abuse courts. I don't know what counties have that in the state of Minnesota, but the focus is on controlled substances.
Okay.
So, what I indicated.
Excuse me,
oh,
is that by nature of the grant? That it's,
That's
what dictates that you guys didn't make that decision on your own?
Yes, exactly. So they're very strict with the grant about what participants we can have in there. For instance, we can't allow third-degree murder participants in there. So somebody that sells drugs and leads to death, and we charge them with third-degree murder, they're not allowed in according to the federal standards. There's other standards that they have as well. But just emphasizing or talking about that too is, every case we look at, and I look at on a case-by-case basis. We get facts in the investigation, and let's say somebody provides heroin where somebody else dies. And we certainly actively pursue those cases. And when the facts warrant it and the criminal history warrants it, we're very aggressive on that. And we've had a number of cases, as I mentioned, and we have a couple that are pending with deaths that we are pursuing prison. We had one case where two co-defendants provided heroin to a Chaska resident, and it was laced with carfentanil. And carfentanil is used to tranquilize animals. So it's even worse than fentanyl, obviously. And what happened was, and the cases are already over, so I can talk a little bit about it, is these two individuals who admittedly were not massive drug dealers, but they were selling heroin, usually to get high themselves or use it, but they weren't millionaires or anything like that. But they certainly sought out somebody they knew, sent a text message, started with a text message at 10:30 at night. Hey, do you want some serious Asian fire? Which is a slang for some, heroin. And the guy said, well, I just have a Target gift card and some Killer Buds, some marijuana. That's it. Well, we'll see what we can get. Next thing you know, there's some text messages back and forth. 2 a.m, they show up into a parking lot of the guy's residence. He shoots up in the car. He goes inside, he overdoses, and he's dead. So Chaska Police Department just vigorously pursued this case for a year. And we had one defendant charged, and she was willing to cooperate and meet and talk with us. And that led to a prosecution of the other dealer who we determined was more significant. And so he's in prison, and they were both charged with third-degree murder. They both pled guilty to third-degree murder. And the individual that died was a 25-year-old that was up here for a faith-based treatment for heroin addiction and slid off that path. So I use it as one case of an example that it has real consequences from real loved ones that our office talks to, and they lost their 25-year-old son to, an insidious disease. But back to drug court, it's proven to be an effective, novel approach to address this serious problem. And so through this team of court and community providers, professionals, they're held accountable through the close supervision, as I mentioned. It ensures public safety, while at the same time they receive the intensive treatment. So our goal is that drug courts will reduce drug dependency, reduce recidivism, improve public safety, and save taxpayer money. So shifting just gears for my last couple minutes here, I did want to talk about the opioid crisis as well, as I presented to the council last year. This year, Carver County joined numerous other counties and cities and municipalities to sue opioid manufacturers and distributors. for allegedly using fraudulent marketing tactics to flood our community, Carver County, in the name of outrageous profits. And so the allegations are that Big Pharma had essentially fraudulently marketed these drugs, saying you can use them safely and you can use them safely. I don't want to get the wrong information out there, but you consult with your doctors. But what they did is they, in my opinion, again, this is the allegations in the complaint that is not resolved yet, but they falsely marketed these drugs and they took advantage of people. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to stop their marketing, which I think has already been successful, but hold them accountable for the harm that they've done to our citizens and across the country. Now, I'm not optimistic and don't want to create the impression that there's a big pile of money coming to Carver County. We're hopeful that if there's a settlement, that money will get pushed into our communities so we can get the treatment for these individuals and it can help. But this is really important because it's part of a larger group of plaintiffs. Some of the cases have settled, but we're part of this massive group, and the goal, again, is to not just let this go by in the name of their profits, that they were taking advantage of this. So we had, as I mentioned, those 20 drug-related deaths for those 3 years, but there were 638 drug overdose deaths in Minnesota in 2018. State of Minnesota, 72,000 in 2017. That was up from 64,000 in 2016. And the majority of those overdose deaths were attributed to opioids. In 2018, we had 8 drug overdose deaths in Carver County. We had 2 in 2017. So finally, our office prosecuted 114 either felony or gross misdemeanor drug cases in 2018. So 114, that's a lot of cases for our community. And I think, I won't speak for what people's opinion about how much drugs we have in our community, but it's here. And it's something that we're trying to work with so we can reduce it. But I appreciate the opportunity to present on that and especially talk about our drug court and to show that we're looking at innovative ways that we can deal with these issues. And the credit goes to all of the people on this team and the different agencies, because if I listed them all, you'd be encouraged to know the collaboration and the cooperation, that people aren't saying, well, I don't want to do that. I do. No, what can we do? We can do more and we can help. And it starts from the minute that they're arrested by law enforcement. And so they work with us very closely and collaborate. And I think that it'll be very successful. And so I appreciate that opportunity. And I appreciate the opportunity to prosecute for the city of Victoria.
Thank you. Counsel, questions?
Question for you. So this drug court is now initially funded by grant dollars. Do you guys have some kind of plan in place? Obviously the statistics are there with the great outcomes. Do you have some kind of plan in place to sustain this after the grant dollars are gone?
That's the last page. So do you want to contribute some? No, I'm kidding. Well, that's a really good question because I had to work early on with the process with our board to get some commitment and support from this, knowing that at the end of 4 years, we could apply for another grant after that. You don't know what's going to happen, but they've committed that they want to see if it works, but they are fully behind this, just like they were with Vets Court. So I appreciate you asking that question because it will. It's going to cost additional monies once it ends. And we don't want to get to 4 years and then have the board go, well, we're not doing it anymore. And we put all that effort and that work in. And we're hopeful that we can get an extended grant. But, there's a lot of money out there, certainly under this administration right now in the federal government. They are promoting, trying to curb this opioid abuse. And this is a start of it, too. It's not just opioids. Again, it's methamphetamines. But it is a terribly insidious drug. And the case I mentioned, because it's over, and we completed it on Friday, was she had gone to Teen Challenge for 2 years, which is an intensive program that they have. It's faith-based, but it's intensive treatment, and was sober for 2 years, got done, and relapsed, and then admitted to the probation violation on Friday. And it shows the support that you need, and it just shows the dangers of this. And I talked with her father outside in the hallway, and he tracked me down and said, thanks for giving her a chance and an opportunity to get sober again, but I know this is really hard and difficult. And I said, you can make a difference too by talking to your daughter, and you can make a difference by encouraging her and knowing that this is it, because otherwise the other gate is to prison. But I don't think anybody really wants to step up and say, yeah, I want to be an addict. But we have a lot of support from our administrator, and I'm encouraged by our board support and hopefully your support as well, because it goes a long way to show that we need to have these types of programs.
What's the total annual cost of this fully loaded with, if you take everything, what's it costing the county per year?
Yeah, that's a tough question to really knock down until we know. I mean, the startup, it could be $100,000 or more, but the startup's going to be significant because we have to hire a coordinator. But once we get up and running, it's and what's really costly are the consistent drug testing. So that's a pretty significant cost for us that you're going to have to get them tested frequently. But we're working on that too, because we're having an upcoming board meeting to talk about that to see what happens at the year 5 for our board.
Is it a voluntary program, or is this part of the sentencing?
Yeah, it's voluntary. So they go and they observe drug court and determine if they want to be in it. And again, the incentive for them is get sober and live a productive life and know how to treat it. But also the incentive is, which we have to, is you can have a reduction in your sentence. That you're not necessarily going to be a felon for life, or we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because otherwise what incentive would they have? But some don't want to do it. It's an intensive program. We've seen with Vets Court, some say, no, I just want to go down the traditional path. I'll pay my fine and I'll do my weekend in jail and I want to be done. I don't want to have to answer every single week, because you're really held accountable. And it's exciting, though. We've visited other drug courts and to see the graduation of others, and it's really motivating to see after a 2-year period if they can successfully complete the program. And there's a lot of incentives too. Believe it or not, there's incentives for them to when they come in, of rewards that they might have if they've been successful.
Other questions?
Just want to commend you and congratulate you on your grant. It sounds like a wonderful program.
Yeah, thank you.
Very progressive and proactive approach to trying to deal with the difficult problems. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like that you could save significantly more than what you have to pay over the long term by keeping people out of jail and out of the court system. Is there any studies that relate to that or have looked at that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that per diem you're saving. That's probably the majority of the $6,000 the average cost, because otherwise you're incarcerating them for 60 days and then they do I'm just using that as an example. They do their 60 days, they get out, and then they have an agent, probation agent, says you got to complete your treatment. But the agents have hundreds of clients. So they don't test them every single week. They don't bring them before court and say, how are things going? You don't have a job yet? Why not? Or you tested positive over the weekend, or where were you? Those types of things. There's a real accountability to that. And it's proven then that they're not in our system as much, or they don't reoffend. Because every time you get second, third charge, you come back. It's a mischaracterization when people say, at least in the state of Minnesota, that we have so many low-level drug dealers or drug offenders that are in prison. That's just not the case. It takes a lot to get to prison if you're a drug offender. Now, if you're a drug dealer and you have a significant amount, that might get you to prison, but it takes a lot of violations. It takes many chances that you have. So, and I'm speaking from my experience, of course, and I'm not saying that there aren't anomalies that are out there, but we're not putting people in prison for low levels of pot or your first time offense that you might have some meth, because it's just not going to prove to be effective.
Got it. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming in and briefing us and the public. Hopefully this program will deliver the results, and it sounds like it will. So,
Yep.
Council, any final questions?
Nope.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Council.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next item is 2.3, CARA South Area Utility Extension Project Update.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I have the pleasure of presenting the next three agenda items, all which relate to the area south of the current city limits or at the city's southern boundary. We thought it would be a good idea to provide the council with an update on the South Area Utility Extension Project because we haven't provided you with one for quite some time. So all the way a year ago now, the City Council authorized final design for the South Area Street and Utility Extension Project. As a refresher, the scope of this project included sanitary sewer and force main extension, water main extensions, and construction of a major lift station in our south growth area. And I'll pop over to a map in a minute. But this lift station is a significant lift station. It's intended on an interim basis to serve 3,500 RECs, which in your mind, you could compare that to 3,500 households if you wanted to get a sense of how many, how big of an area is ultimately going to drain to that lift station. Long-term, it's would be designed for 6,810 units. So that is really the city's entire south growth area is going to flow through this lift station.
Let me interrupt for just a second. I want to make sure, we're talking about the one that would be down, we haven't finalized any location, but we were talking about down by the railroad tracks or down in that area.
Correct.
That's the lift station.
That's
you're
the
talking
one, yes.
Different from a lift station that's on, within Victoria today?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. The lift station would include on an interim basis 2 90 horsepower pumps. Those are the biggest pumps the city has, larger than any pump the city currently has in any of our existing lift stations. Plans include a generator, odor control, and a control building. So it's a pretty extensive facility. As part of the scope of that project, the council also authorized final design for a street extension. So I will pop over to a graphic that hopefully will cooperate and load. This is County Road 11, and to your right would be Marsh Lake Road, and the railroad tracks is down here on the south side. So I will just, for the heck of it, bring us back over to here so I can orient you here as well. So here's Marsh Lake Road to the north, County Road 11 here, and the railroad tracks down in this area. So what we're talking about is extending sanitary sewer and force main from where Lennar will have the sewer extended to by next summer. Those plans have been approved, but winter came before they could construct all of that sewer pipe. But the city would be extending the sanitary sewer and then a force main down along Marsh Lake Road, down along the county right-of-way, to a lift station that needs to be located in this area. So we're looking to locate that lift station in a low area so that the city's entire south growth area will drain to this lift station, and then the flows will be pumped back up to the gravity trunk system that was constructed with the developments on the south side of Wassermann Lake. The project scope also just includes a short little trunk water main extension from the Lennar development, also along Marsh Lake Road to the Geshtock property. The water main would then be extended through the development to serve this area in the south. So it's pretty big, pretty complex project. We have $4 million in the budget for the project. But essentially, I would say roughly maybe around May, we started to kind of put the brakes on the design process. We had gotten to the point of having really 90% plans complete, but we really wanted to be moving forward in partnership with development of the Geshtock, Vogel, and Welter properties. In addition, we would need to annex the areas before we can extend utilities. You can't extend utilities outside of your city limits. I suppose you could if the township agreed to the extension, but typically you would extend the utilities as you're annexing the property. And then, of course, we've had some uncertainty about the Marsh Lake Road project that we've been working through over the past year. So I'm going to jump to the lift station first. What's really key, and the mayor touched on it, the location of the lift station is really important and critical to this project. So when we finalize the plans, we need to have the final lift station location. We have all the guts designed, but ultimately we need to plop it on a plan for a contractor to build in its final location, and then we need to either acquire land rights through easement acquisition or through the development process for that lift station to be permanently located. The developer for the Welter parcel, which is this parcel just north of the tracks, the council has seen maybe 1 or 2 concepts already for that development. There had been some discussion over the year about land use relative to the comprehensive plan. So the developer who's looking at that parcel is continuing to work through concepts. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to finalize the lift station in a location that might not work with their road layout and with their building layout. So we're continuing to work pretty closely as they develop different concepts. They'll reach out to our team to make sure where they're looking at for the lift station still is viable from an elevation perspective. In our last concept, instead of it being down in this location, it's I want to say somewhere up in here, adjacent to what would be a collector road running through the site, which would be really nice access for us to be able to access and maintain the lift station. So that remains ongoing, and we continue to work pretty closely with them. Once we're able to finalize that location, plans would be able to be finalized fairly quickly, and we could move to bidding and move to construction. Alternatively, if the council didn't want to continue to wait for development, or development wasn't occurring on this property, but we still wanted to proceed with the council's strategic initiative to extend utilities in that area, then we would be determining a final location and then approaching the landowner to acquire or purchase easements in order to construct those improvements. But that's not something staff is suggesting at this point, since we're still working with a specific developer on potential locations. While I have this graphic up, what I'll just note too is that all the development in this area is interconnected. So the Gestock-Vogel parcels that you've seen some concepts on as well, their gravity sewer needs to flow back to this lift station through the Welter development. And the Welter development needs that trunk water line to come through their development to serve there. So the developments are intertwined, and the landowners are in regular communication with each other. The different developers who've looked at the properties are all in communication with each other. So there's a lot of collaboration, but nothing yet finalized and ready to go. Relative to the portion up here on the right side of the screen, and I'm going to zoom in and hope this painfully large file scrolls over without too much trouble. The other area where we'd been working on a plan, so the green line would be a force main and the blue line would be a water line. So when the preliminary design was put together, we were operating under the assumption that the Marsh Lake Road project was going to move forward as a county road project. So the utility placement you'll see is out here in the Schmieg's farmland, but that was to accommodate the road construction, because under those county plans, this road, Marsh Lake Road, was shifting to the north a bit to protect some trees on the south side of the road. Now that project is no longer proceeding as a county road improvement, one of the things that staff is evaluating is moving these sewer and water pipes into the existing road right-of-way so we can minimize the amount of easement acquisition we would need to obtain from the property owners. So we could put the water main and force main within the existing roadway easement. The risk that the city might run is that somewhere down the road, if a county road improvement came in, we may be in a situation where we'd need to look at relocating those 2 pipes. If the Schmiegs were ever to sell and develop their property, you could certainly reroute those utilities through the development. They're force main, they're pressure pipes, so gravity, their location relative to the topography of the area is not significant. They can really be located anywhere because they're under pressure. So that's something that staff is taking a look at, and if we move it, we would be recommending that these pipes get constructed with the Marsh Lake Road Improvement Project so that the contractors that's building that road is also putting the pipes in the ground. So we're not looking anything from the council relative to that question tonight, but just wanted to draw your attention to it. The other element of the project that the council had authorized final design for was extension of Timber Terrace to Marsh Lake Road. This may test your memories a little bit to reflect back, but when the Laketown 11th preliminary plat came in, Lennar was looking at making a street connection to Marsh Lake Road in this area from what will likely be Laketown's 16th edition. There was some concern about tying in the road at that location, given the questions about Marsh Lake Road, the elevation of the road. The residents also had concern, the Schmiegs had concern about headlights. The way that road's gonna line up would be, pretty close to their driveway and across from their driveway. So we were looking at alternatives to see if we could make a connection here instead of there. So that would be a separate bid package. We've purposely separated the utilities from the road because you could make different decisions. The council could proceed with putting the pipes in, you wouldn't need to build the road. The road over here could wait to be constructed until such time as these two properties were to develop. Now that it seems like we have some clarity on where Marsh Lake Road is headed, we'll be looking to schedule a meeting with the Schmiegs to revisit all of these questions and layouts of the pipes and whatnot. But then would be returning back to council with additional information on that at some point. As noted, the budget, and Trish covered this in her presentation today, the 2020 CIP split between the sewer, water, and street categories has $4 million in it for this project, which is in the ballpark of what our last estimate was that we received for the work included here. So for next steps, we're gonna take a look at the location of the pipes relative to the Marsh Lake Road project. We're gonna continue to work with potential developer on the lift station location. I just saw a meeting request come in for Friday to have another meeting with them to talk about a variety of topics, including the lift station location. I did include in the council packet a schedule, and the way we provided the schedule was and I am going to just pull it up in the staff report, was in a format such that you could get a sense of how the schedule potentially would be affected by development. So if we knew the final lift station location today, there's probably about 10 weeks of work, and part of what was worked into there was a holiday schedule, so the, people, it's harder to get plans completed when a bunch of people are out of the office. But if we knew the final lift station location right now, we would anticipate that we'd be in front of the council for approval of the plans and specs in February, bidding in late March, and then the lift station would be fully operational by October of 2020. There's a 12-week lead time associated with purchasing panels and pumps for the lift station, so that's a pretty significant piece of the schedule. That's just how long it takes to get them ordered. You'll hear stories of the delays from the pumps being shipped from overseas on a boat, and you're patiently awaiting the arrival of your pump. So what our recommendation would be that the latest the council would approve plans would be April 13th, 2020, if we wanted to complete these improvements in 2020, and that would have the lift station fully operational by the end of the year. So this is information that we have available to us that we're sharing with our development people who are working in the area as what our schedule needs to be if we want to do a 2020 project. Alternatively, it would become a 2021 project. And I think that's all I have, unless anyone has any questions.
I do have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
So we're assuming that the people I don't know how to ask this question, so I'm just going to spit it out here. The people along Marsh Lake Road probably have sewer and wells currently.
You mean septic and?
Septic.
Septic and wells, and thank you for that help. Septic and wells. So at the point that we're putting in these utilities, do they have the option to hook up? How does that, what's our policy, what's our process on that?
So let's first speak to sanitary sewer. So gravity sanitary sewer main is coming out generally to, I'm gonna go to the one with the property lines. Generally right about here, and then it's gonna switch to a force main. So that's a pressure pipe that isn't available for connection. So as that force main comes past this house here, they wouldn't be able to tie up to it. Connections are made to gravity sewer lines, not pressure pipes. The water line is also only being extended along here and through this area. So if, say, this home here wanted to connect to the water, they could. They would just have a series of fees that they would have to pay in order to make that connection. Those fees would include a lateral benefit charge, which is essentially a fee in lieu of an assessment, because we aren't proposing, because this is a trunk water line extension past here, we aren't proposing to assess these landowners for that trunk extension. But if they were to connect to it, they would have to pay an additional fee on top of the $10,000 in, well, that would be sewer and water. But yeah, that's the extent of the sewer and water. The majority of the homes in this area are up the road a ways and not in the area where we're extending as part of this project.
I have a couple questions.
Go ahead.
The $4 million, you said there's a road in there. Tell me again what the road is?
There's $500,000 in the CIP for extending this little piece of timber terrace through to Marsh Lake Road.
Okay, so the 4 million, or 3.5 million if you exclude the road, it would be my understanding that the city would, one way or another, recover that investment through charges to developers, potentially assessments, but probably charges to developers for new housing.
Correct.
And so when it's all over and the smoke clears in 10 years, the city will have some bonding debt that it should be able to pay off, and it will not be encumbered by this project.
Yeah, so, and I think Trish left, but my understanding is that the plan would be to fund the project through a combination of debt service and cash that's available in the utility funds. And that debt service would be paid through utility fees collected from the developers at the time. We collect fees in two ways. Some portion of the fees are collected at the time of development, and other portions are collected with the building permit fees.
Yes.
So she has a model built of how many units would need to come in order to cover
Right.
this
The
bond.
city's plans are that this is an investment which will be recovered,
Correct.
and it's
And
not
not
gonna
paid for
flow
with general
into the
tax.
taxpayers' pockets.
Right.
Right.
Second question, the sewer, I'm confused. You got two types of sewer here, and it sounds like they're flowing both ways. Is that true?
So what we would be building would be primarily a lift station and force main. So lift station down by the tracks, and then a pressure sewer pipe that takes the flows that would flow by gravity into the lift station and pump it back uphill to the Lennar development.
It's coming down the hill, and then the pump house is pumping it back up the hill.
Correct.
It's getting
And
treated.
this all makes sense.
Met Council treats it.
This all makes sense.
It does. So the city's comprehensive plan, when we do comprehensive sewer planning, it is a challenge in the city of Victoria because you know what kind of topography exists. So we're trying to find the balance of limiting the number of lift stations that are constructed because there's a cost associated with pumping the sewage uphill as opposed to just letting gravity do the work of getting it where it needs to go. So the other thing that we're looking at is how deep the gravity sewer lines are getting. So Trunk lines that are 40 feet deep in the ground is common, but we don't like to see our lateral neighborhood sewer lines over 30. It's a construction challenge and a maintenance challenge, so when we lay this all out, we're trying to find the balance between that.
So I would think that the pump house being next to a railroad track is an optimum, that you would try to move it somewhat away from the railroad track into a road.
So it really did depend. There's been layouts where there's been access closer to this location with different concepts. But yeah, having access is pretty important. So this current version where it's getting moved up by a potential collector street certainly is appealing to the Public Works Department.
Thanks.
Council, any further questions?
Typically, how far can you run a force main on the sewer system?
It just depends on how big a pumps you want.
Okay.
So this is our longest force main run within the city, but Met Council has force main running from Waconia to Victoria.
That's what I thought, the one behind our house.
Yeah.
Force main.
Yep.
So where is the Met Council interceptor line from here?
It is all the way back in downtown.
It runs on this side of the building over here, doesn't it?
Yep. Yes. So it follows the trail out to Kirklocken Park.
So all this sewage has to get back into town?
Yes.
Okay.
So the
Where
city.
does it go?
So the city's been constructing trunk sewer main to serve the South Growth area since I got here in 2001. So the city's trunk sewer lines run through the Watermark neighborhood over to, we have another lift station 18, located by Waterbrook Fellowship Church that pumps into this trunk line. And then we have deep trunk sanitary sewer all the way through these neighborhoods. So that's our trunk system that was designed and intended to serve the whole South Growth area back when we did the 2020 comprehensive plan. But then it connects into the Met Council interceptor system that flows up to Shorewood and eventually ends up in Shakopee.
There's
It's
a
treated.
treatment
And then it's
plant there?
treated there. Yep.
Okay,
The blank goes a long way.
that's a lot of stuff going around. Quite a journey.
There's another. All right. This could go downhill quick.
Yeah, I know.
The,
I stopped.
yeah, exactly. The council, any further comments, questions? Okay, this was for discussion only. Thank you, Kara. One final thing, there was, when I asked about the lift station, there was a little bit of discussion in some of our one-on-ones about a lift station up by Marsh Lake Road, depending on where we run those lines. Is that something that we should touch on now, or is that something that'll come back later?
Yeah, I think we're good for now.
Okay, perfect. All right, in that case, if there's nothing else, thank you, Kara. We're going to move on to 2.4, Marsh Lake Road. And council, without objection, I asked, I know there's a few residents who wanted to speak. I asked them to hold any comments until now, so if there's no objections, I do have at least one slip. Jake?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Jacob Steen with Larkin Hoffman Attorneys, and we represent the Marsh Lake Hunt Club. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about this. As you know, as I've been up here several times before, the club has had a consistent preference for Marsh Lake Road, and that's, of course, a city road. So we very much welcome council's action tonight and appreciate that this project is continuing to move forward as a city road. To the extent that any of the options before you tonight do expand the right-of-way, require additional trees or additional costs to the adjacent property owners, the Hunt Club does oppose those additional costs or expansion. It's a little unclear if that is the case, so I'll let the city engineer address that, but to the extent that there is additional right-of-way or costs, we would oppose it. Of course, the trail does involve some significant costs to the city. It's not clear where those costs will ultimately land. We do believe that if and when a trail were to come through, those costs would be better borne by the county or the state or grants, but some other entity other than the adjacent property owners. We, of course, however, recognize the benefit of taking action tonight. And to the conversation that this council had just last Monday, this action will, of course, give staff significant clarity as to how to respond to development proposals in the future, specifically addressing concerns about an unfinished county plan that was abandoned effectively last week. With that clarity, we do think it is a good opportunity to revisit the question that was just brought up last week, which is how to designate this road in the 2040 comp plan. The club would support removal of the road as a county road designation in the comp plan. Of course, that's a 2040 plan, so it's a 20-year plan. And based on the discussions that we've had and that I've heard, it sounds at least unlikely in the near future that this will be a county road. Of course, it can always be added back in. So we would support removal of the road as a county road and appreciate the council's action tonight to direct engineering on a city road. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to address the council? Okay. Kara?
All righty. Marsh Lake Road preliminary design. So here we are, happily presenting information on the city option, finally. So in July of 2019, the City Council authorized preliminary design based on option 3, which was rebuilding the road to match the existing width and alignment. Option 3 was modified to reflect a 9-ton design and evaluation of a construction of a trail on the north side of the road. So that's what we've been working on. I have a little outline here of what we want to cover today, some of which I'm going to go into in a little bit more technical detail for everyone's benefit. But we're going to review the existing vertical and horizontal alignment. Maybe not in extreme technical detail, but try not to get too in the weeds on that. I'd like to review the trail typical sections that we reviewed that led us to the typical section that we're currently recommending be evaluated further if we would be moving to final design. Cost estimates, and then I want to spend a little time reviewing the layout of the road without a trail and with a trail, and just highlight some differences and point out some information that isn't apparent when you would just go and look at the graphics without any background for them. These next 3 slides just reflect the options that were presented to the public and the City Council way back earlier this year. So option 1 was the county road. Option 2 was essentially a city standard street. And then option 3 was really what ended up getting moved forward. So those are there if we need to go back to them. The matrix that compared the 3 just threw in here so we would have it. That should anybody have any questions about that, we could go back to it. But where we are, so as noted, under option number 3, we were looking at essentially rebuilding the road with 2 12-foot lanes with a 2-foot shoulder on either side. And the way the direction was provided and the way it was presented to the City Council was to follow the existing vertical and horizontal alignment, which we had gotten some feedback from residents that they really wanted to see the road stay in its current location. And there's 2 benefits to a road staying in its current location. You minimize impacts to adjacent property owners when you improve the road if you leave it in its current location. And then secondly, typically it is the least amount of cost because you're not, if you think about the way a road sits, you know, the road has a little curve to it and then your driveways and your yards tie into that road. If you pick the road up and you shift it, then you have to restore these additional areas that you've disturbed and match the grades in. So those costs can be significant, they can be insignificant. It really just depends on what's adjacent to the roadway, what the grades are like, whether there's trees you'd have to clear to move the road. But so generally, the most cost-effective approach is to stick with the existing alignment. So we've been reconstructing streets in the city dating back to 2003. And typically, when we're reconstructing a road, we do try to follow the current existing center line to minimize impacts on either side. That's pretty common practice for us. But as you're designing a road, you do want to take a look at the existing horizontal and vertical alignment based on the proposed design speed of the road. So engineers determine what the design speed of a road should be based on the functionality and projected traffic and projected uses of the road. But what you're really looking to do is to design the road to accommodate the speed at which cars are driving. So, of course, there's that balance between not wanting it to be 55 design speed, which then softens curves and allows people to drive it really fast. But then the other extreme is making sure that it's safe. If people are going to be prone to drive the road 55 miles an hour and you have all these 30-mile-an-hour curves on it, then you run the risk of creating a safety hazard. So it is important to just make sure we pause and understood what the existing conditions are on the road. So looking at the existing conditions, and I'll hop over to the technical page here, but we had one curve that does not meet a 30-mile-an-hour design speed, and then we had two curves that don't meet a 40-mile design speed, and that's horizontally, and I'll walk through these. Vertically, there were 3 curves that didn't meet a 35-mile-an-hour design speed and 4 curves that did not meet 40.
Kara, can you clarify that? Does that mean you have to take them slower than that speed?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's 3 curves that you can't go 35 miles. You have to slow down.
You should slow down
Got it.
to get through them,
Thank you.
according to conservative technical design, but from an engineering perspective. This file is a little bit large, so I'm hoping it's going to cooperate with us today. So first we'll talk about the horizontal curves. So the first curve that was noted that does not meet 30 or a 35-mile-an-hour design is just up here at the end. So this little curve here, you're coming into a stop condition, so that's generally not as significant. You know, if the sight lines are clear and you're coming around a horizontal curve and you know there's a stop sign there, that's not of significant concern. Then the other area horizontally, and everybody is quite familiar with this area, is the curves in the area of the 6 Mile Creek crossing. So those would meet a 40-mile-an-hour design speed. Let's see if it loads. It meets 35, but not 40. And that's currently posted as a 35-mile-an-hour area through that section. But it does meet 35, just not 40.
The whole road is 35, isn't it?
Currently, the posted speed limit, so the city determined a rural residential district through the central portion of the roadway. So where there's homes, where there's driveways accessing. So that was in accordance with state statute at the time.
And now we can change that.
So under the new law, the city has more control over setting the speed limit. It's a little unclear yet how one does that, because the language says we still have to have an engineering study and all sorts of reasons for why we need to do it. So cities are currently trying to figure out what the legislature meant by what they're looking for a study.
I thought they didn't have to as long as it was a residential.
Correct, but this wouldn't meet the definition of a residential street along its whole corridor. So within a neighborhood where you have house after house after house after house, that would meet the definition of a residential roadway, where land use on either side of it is single-family or multifamily homes.
So go back to my question. Is the road in fact 35 from end to end, or were you saying it changes? I thought
It's
it was 30.
unposted on either end. There's a posted speed limit in the middle.
Okay, got it, all right.
And that was in accordance with state statute at the time. The council passed a resolution to designate that a rural residential district that allowed you to post it at 35.
All right, and that's the only posting on the road, and it's what, a mile and a half?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so that, otherwise horizontally, the road's fairly straight. There weren't any other horizontal curves worth noting when we did our review. Now vertically, so the bottom half here is showing the road profile. So if you drive down the center of the road, each curve has information associated with it, and there's design standards for what, how steep those curves should be, what the length of the curve should be, and it takes into account things like stopping sight distance. So if you're, let's say you're, coming up a hill and you're going, let's take ourselves somewhere other than here, you're going 65 miles an hour, you need to be able to see over that hill so that you don't suddenly, somebody stopped on the other side of the hill and you smash into them because there's a driveway they're turning into, you can't see them, you're speeding up over the hill. So, design speed is intended to design a road that's safe so that you aren't seeing accidents and things of that nature. So working our way from one end of the road to the other, beginning by County Road 43, this first little uphill climb does not meet 35 mile an hour design speed, but it does meet 30, and again, you're coming into a stopped condition, so it's pretty close to a 35. And we really, in this graphic, scanned for 35 mile an hour. So if I don't stop on it, it means it's 35 mile or better. So here is the big hill by Schmieg's house, and that one does not meet a 35 mile an hour design speed, but it meets a 30. And then we have one more little guy at the end that does not meet 30, but it's a stop condition. You're coming up to the intersection of 11, so it's not, from a technical perspective, it's not as great of a concern. The rest of the curves vary from 40 miles an hour to 60 to 35, 35, 35, 55, 60, 40, 35. So lots of 35s along the corridor. If you were to say that you wanted the design speed to be 40, then there would be more curves that would need to be vertically adjusted in order to meet that design standard. So to talk through what that means a little bit, so the length of this curve is 250. I can't read that small. But the curve as it exists today is 250. In order to be 35 miles an hour, it would need to be 275. So what that means is we would need to drop the road down a little bit and lengthen the curve. So you'd be lowering the center of the road in order to achieve that 35 mile an hour curve. So as it stands, the way preliminary design was authorized, we were directed to match the existing conditions. If the council wanted us to start taking a look at shifts in alignment horizontally or vertically from a design speed perspective, that would be something you would want to do as we move into final design. So you wouldn't want us to go through all of final design and do a bunch of engineering work, and then when we present final plans say, oh, hey, we need to make that curve a 35 mile an hour curve. That now would be the appropriate time to make that transition in the project if that was something that the council was interested in doing. And we can come back to that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the trail. So the council authorized us to look at adding a trail on the north side of the road. And as you recall, when we talked about it, there was a lot of questions. Well, what does it mean? What's it going to cost? Are we going to need a bridge? How are we going to fit this along certain parts of the road? Will we need a wall? tree impacts, things of that nature. So the first thing we did was work with the consultant to come up with a couple of different alternatives for how that trail could be added, given what the recommendation was relative to the road itself. So leaving the road in its existing horizontal location and then adding a trail on the north side with a little bitty ditch in between was one of the alternatives they looked at. They also looked at, so this was creating some red flags in terms of how things were tying into the existing neighbors to the north and land to the north. So the consultant ran an option where you put some curb and gutter in and then really drop the trail down below the road. When you drive that corridor along the north side, there's a lot of areas where the slope slopes away from the road. So they were trying to kind of capture what was happening out there. Then they also looked at, because then it was starting, when you look at that alternative, it was starting to push the trail in certain areas outside of the roadway easement. So the existing gravel road isn't necessarily centered exactly in the existing roadway easement. You can picture how that would happen over time when you're dealing with a gravel road. It isn't fixed the same way a road with curb and gutter might be. So under that alternative 2, we were starting to see that the trail was really starting to skirt onto private property in a couple of sections. So they ran an option where they moved the trail right up next to the curb. So like we have on Smithtown Road, it's actually a sidewalk, but it's the same concept where you have curb with the trail right next to the road. This option minimizes the impacts to the adjacent property owners, but it has the highest cost because you're running curb and gutter along the whole length of the project. And then you would also need to introduce stormwater treatment. So one of the important factors for us to look at with the trail is what permit requirements would be triggered by constructing the trail. And under watershed district rules, if the trail drains to a green area that's half the width of the trail is exempt from needing treatment. So if this trail, half the width of it is draining into this green area, we wouldn't suddenly be obligated to construct stormwater ponds and storm sewer and whatnot to treat the impervious surface from the trail. In the case of this alternative, we would have had to. So I disliked that alternative pretty quickly from the cost implication associated with it. I spent considerable time with pages and pages of cross-sections of design detail looking at those 3 options. The impacts to the property owners between the 3 didn't vary too wildly, but the cost of this one being higher caused us to rule that out. So where we landed with what we wanted the consultant to finally draw up and cost estimate off of was really similar to that first alternative. The only difference is we ended up shifting the road a little bit to the south so that the footprint was centered in the right-of-way. So there's parts of that road that are not quite centered in the roadway easement. We shifted the whole thing back to center, essentially so that we were splitting the impacts of the trail between the south side property owners and the north side property owners, because it really was just starting to shove a little bit too far north and outside of the roadway easement, so we would have had to acquire easements from the property owners in order to fit that trail.
So you're going south all the way down the road?
Just a smidge. So
What's a
talking
smidge?
about a couple feet. That it's just shifting
Because you
a
know
little
we
bit to the
have,
south.
one of the residents would like you to go north.
Correct, yes. But we're still operating within the existing, this puts a footprint within the city's current authority to construct the improvements without acquiring easements from any of the landowners if you wanted to build a trail.
If you built a road, you would normally go down the center of the surveyed right-of-way,
So when we build a brand-new road, we locate it in the center.
right?
when I reconstruct a road, I typically recommend reconstructing it along the same center line of the existing traveled way to minimize the impacts to adjacent property owners. So things like trees, hedges, fences, things like that.
Is this a new road or a reconstructed road?
It's a reconstructed road.
Okay.
Yep. But if the intent is to not acquire easements, this is the way we would have to shift it to fit the trail without having to acquire easements from the adjacent landowners. And when we walk through the layout, I can show you some of those areas where it was a little bit tight. And then the other alternative, of course, was the no trail alternative. So we'll walk through the detailed layouts a little bit so you can see the difference between those. But I am just going to touch on a couple of things before we go into that detail so you kind of have some background in your head before we get there. So in terms of where we landed on costs, so total cost, including construction, contingency, engineering, and administrative costs, the roadway only with no trail, as depicted here, is about $2.1 million. The roadway plus trail kicked us up to $3.5 million. And what really is driving that, and you can see that on the detailed cost estimate that's in your packet, you of course have the expense of the trail base and the pavement, that's obvious. But in order to fit that trail in and match it in with existing conditions and not start impacting outside of the city's roadway easement, you have to look at constructing some retaining walls in some areas. And there's just additional grading because you're working outside of just the existing roadway footprint. So I'll highlight that as we walk through the details of the two layouts where they're different. I'll note that the 2020 CIP included $2.482 million for this project. So you can see here the difference. These are the two detailed cost estimates, and we've got ditch grading for $95,000 that we wouldn't have to do in that alternative 4 where we're just matching the road that's there. And then we have potentially $460,000 worth of retaining walls. That number might be able to be reduced if the landowners adjacent to some of these areas would be willing to grant temporary grading easements and let us grade beyond the right-of-way line. So into farmland or into their front yard, depending on where we're talking about along the corridor, there might be an opportunity to reduce that. This is the cost of the trail and itself, and then this is additional grading that would need to happen in order to, the trail it can't just be floating in thin air, so you would need to do some grading associated with it. I do want to note, as the question seemed to be raised today from one of the property owners, or it might have been from the Hunt Club, under the city's assessment policy, trails such as a trail along Marsh Lake Road is not assessed. So those, under the city's assessment policy, the trail is not assessed. That would need to be funded by the city through the general tax levy. Under the city's adopted assessment policy, a portion of the street and storm sewer costs would be assessed under the city's adopted policy. If we move forward to final design, or when we move forward to final design, so we actually know the scope of what we're building, we'll end up running the project through the city's policy, and then we'll be coming back to the council for direction on what to do relative to the city's assessment policy. So you're not making any decisions about that yet. We wouldn't be prepared to present you information. What I would like to note is that we've been reconstructing or rehabilitating streets since 2003, and every single project has included some number of assessment to the adjacent property owners. I can tell you that every single project, the neighbors had a reason why they shouldn't be assessed and why their project was different. That I can say with pretty good consistency, and the advice that we have always given the council along the way is our advice is to try to treat everybody fair and equitably. And so that'll be the lens through which you'll be asked to take a look at whatever assessment calculations we might come back with. This corridor is unique from the other ones because we have these large tracts of undeveloped land. I had mentioned at a previous meeting that I would anticipate we would be going through the special benefit analysis process like we did for Steiger Lake Lane to help sort out what the assessments amount should be relative to state statute pertaining to special assessments. So if we move ahead, we'll have a whole meeting just on assessments alone. We'll have a whole meeting with the neighbors on assessments alone. That'll be a whole piece to come, but the council, certainly it's the council's decision how you would address or implement your policy on that. So did want to just note that there briefly. Okay, so we're going to look at the layout review with no trail. We're going to look at the layout review with a trail. And I just wanted to highlight some things for council discussion that will come after we take a look at those two different layouts. The big question is trail or no trail. So again, you don't want to change your mind on whether you're building a trail or not once you're in final design. Once you start spending the expensive engineering dollars to produce detailed plans and specifications for bidding purposes, you really want to know what you're building. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing a lot of re-engineering, which we've already spent plenty of money on engineering on this project. I'd like to see us try to minimize what we spend there going forward. But the trail or no trail decision also sort of spills into some of these other things. So the council's gotten some feedback from property owners, so I just wanted to highlight some of the things that have been raised to the council as possible scope modifications. So vertical and horizontal alignment, we do have a property owner who's requested that the horizontal alignment be shifted, which we'll highlight when we walk through the layouts. There also was a little bit concern expressed, or at least questions asked relative to those vertical curves. So should any of those vertical curves be modified from a 30-mile-an-hour design speed to a 35-mile-an-hour design speed? I don't think anybody in the residents' realm were advocating for a higher design speed than that. A question was raised about whether berms could be constructed along the road. Council would need to, if that's something the council's interested in, I would need some direction about who are we screening, how big are berms, what sort of criteria am I evaluating the berms on?
Would those take the place of the retaining walls or in addition to the retaining?
Berms are tough because it really depends on the existing conditions adjacent to the property. So if you've got a road that's going this way and a big giant retaining wall down to somebody's farmland, in order to build a berm, you'd have to go way up and then have an even bigger retaining wall on the backside of the berm. But in other areas where the road might be draining, the yards might be draining down to the road, then you could potentially fit a berm in there. But that would, if that's, I wouldn't expect you to say tonight, yes, build berms, but if that's something you want me to investigate further, I would need that direction because that isn't currently in the scope.
Why, what do we want berms for?
I would imagine that, and the city, certainly when development comes in, we'd be looking at berming requirements for the developments adjacent to a road such as this. It provides screening, essentially, from the roadway.
Okay.
So like the berms along County Road 11, those big,
I
those
know.
big berms.
Well, yeah, but that's for those, it's to hide the developments and protect the noise.
Correct.
Is that what it is for the
Yep.
noise?
Yep, and visual separation between the two.
And the developers paid for it.
Correct. Yep.
So is this just for the new development?
It was a question raised in an email to the council, is whether berms were included in the project or not. And they aren't currently, but could be should the council want to explore that further.
Okay.
The next one was streetlights. So this is a noteworthy topic. We've added trails in a couple of different locations. The most recent was along 78th and Cochia. We did end up adding some streetlights along that trail in order to light the trail. That was occurring in conjunction with the Whispering Hills development, so there wasn't anybody living there yet. So, you're putting lights in so that when people move in, they're used to the lights. Adding streetlights after the fact can be challenging when, you have existing homes in an area that are used to having it be dark, and then you come in and start putting streetlights. Streetlights are not currently in the scope. That is something that the city council could direct us to take a look at. To me, the first question is trail or no trail. My kind of quick answer is that the only place, and I need to talk with the Park and Rec director about it, but the place for streetlights that comes to my mind would be at locations where future roads tie in. So if a new residential street connects, typically you'll see a street light at an intersection. So when you're driving up at night, you can, find the intersection you're supposed to turn into.
Okay.
But those could be added
Correct.
afterwards.
Those streetlights could be added after the fact, because those are, Minnesota Valley would be the provider there. It isn't like downtown here where we're paying for, and, we'd have to pay for the streetlights either way, but we run the electrical system for all of these lights. Overhead utility lines, there are some overhead lines along that road. In the option where we have no trail, we wouldn't need to relocate or bury those overhead power lines. The city certainly could choose to pursue that. The city would pay 100% of the cost associated with burying those lines. If we're putting the trail in and the utility lines are in the way of the trail, then under our right-of-way ordinance, we can require the utility company to relocate, and they likely would have to relocate to the non-trail side of the road. Then we would only pay the incremental cost to bury the lines. The cost to relocate, they have to pay, so we would just be paying the incremental cost to bury. I think it would be important to understand trail or no trail before you really start looking at the overhead utility lines. Typically, in final design, we'll be looking at any impacts to gas lines, power lines, any existing cable lines that might be in the area. That would be part of the final design scope. So that's one that you could still.
Do we have room in the existing right-of-way to bury those, or would we have to acquire right-of-way to do so?
We could put them under the trail if we wanted. Since it's our right-of-way, we have some flexibility over what our comfort level would be, and I think we'd pursue keeping it within the existing roadway easement versus purchasing additional right-of-way. Our goal tends to be first looking at it from the perspective of what's the lowest cost and the least amount of impact is typically how we'll first approach a project on a city project. The other question we were asked was whether the project included extension of sanitary sewer and water to the residential homes in the area. The project does not currently include that. Under the city's assessment policy, 35% of the people who would be in the area for connection to sewer and water would need to petition the city to have us study extending sewer and water to them. Under the assessment policy, the property owner pays 100% of the cost of that extension. So, this isn't a trunk line extension. This would just be a lateral water line extension to the homes. I think realistically, just given what I know about how far away sewer and water is currently from the existing homes, it's probably premature to pursue that. If I'm them, I would want to maybe look at it once the pipes are a little closer. But if that's something that the property owners are interested in, that's certainly something we can talk through with them. And they have the right to petition at any time. The form is on the city's website. That can happen. We were also asked about high-speed internet, and I would just note that the city does not provide internet services, so that's all privately operated and extended, so the property owners would want to reach out to the internet providers, and I did share information with the residents that asked me about it, about who those providers are. So those are the things to kind of have in your background as we walk through the different layouts. And I will start with the trail layout first, I think. So, big giant file that hopefully will load. So first of all, just to orient yourself what you're seeing, this yellow is the road with the shoulder on either side of the road. The pink is the trail. And these dashed blue lines are what I would refer to as preliminary grading limit lines. Now this is just generated off of a standard typical section and match point thrown into a software program. When we get into final design, we'll start tweaking what those match points are to minimize the impacts on adjacent property owners. So you shouldn't perceive that as being for sure how far we're going to have to grade outside of the roadway easement in order to do the work. These little yellow lines are the 66-foot wide roadway easement.
Is that grading with the trail or without the trail?
So this option you're looking at right now is with the trail.
Okay.
So this is not going to come as any surprise to anyone, but here's the pool. The trail does not fit adjacent to the pool. So, and we'll come back to this area once we jump over to the other alignment, but if we're going to look at putting a trail past the Lakeside Drive entrance all the way up to 43, we for sure can't fit it. We would have to move the road over in order to fit the trail.
How far?
We'd have to decide how far we'd want to be. I mean, that's a design decision, so we'd take a look at what the design speed is coming around the corner, and then what we think is an appropriate setback from the pool. So that we'd be working with the planning department to see what they might recommend for how we should shift that over. So then we get into this section. So this is the Lakeside Estates neighborhood. There's 2 cul-de-sacs that don't come through. There's landscaping already planted along the road right-of-way and a wetland down here. If we're putting in a trail in, we're for sure going to need to construct a retaining wall through this section because we don't want to rip out trees that were just planted and we don't want to impact a wetland in order to fit a trail in. So this wall is included in the cost calculation and is something that I would see not being able to be eliminated. And then, again, we're just still following the existing footprint. So just to orient everybody, this is the Leitner property, and this is Jeremy Rock's house. This is Jeremy Rock's undeveloped land, I guess I'm going to refer to it, that he purchased, but they live in this house. And again, you're seeing some grading limits extending out here past some trees that are located within the roadway easement. It's with this trail option, it looks to me, based on my detailed review, that we probably would be looking at potentially having to remove some trees within the road right-of-way, or roadway easement in this area in order to protect those trees. But again, when we got into final design, there's different things we can take a look at to see if we can save them. Our first goal is always preservation of trees, regardless of where they are. We try to look through that lens. Coming around this curve, so we are recommending that in any scenario, we would have curb and gutter on both sides of the road through this section in order to minimize impacts. We have a wetland and a creek crossing and some pretty steep slopes off either side. But even with that, we potentially still need a retaining wall through this section. This area
The curb and gutters to avoid erosion problems?
correct, yep.
So where does water go if you don't have?
We would just then outlet at the end of the curb into the ditches. In this area, this is an example where the layout is showing pretty significant grading into this lot, but when I take a look at the grades in final design, we can pull that back. It isn't going to be that significant. A lot of those we can start to match in. So now here's an example where we would need a retaining wall here and all the way along the Schmieg's property if we were trying to minimize the need for grading easements onto their property. Now, because this is farmland, it's quite possible that the property owner would say, sure, we'll work with you and let you do some grading as long as, you know, you do it at a time that doesn't impact our farming operation. So, because I imagine they don't want a wall along their property either. So, you know, there might be some opportunities to minimize that sort of thing in working with the landowner. But the direction that, you know, we first gave the consultant was stay within our property. Let's try to avoid that, and what does that look like? So aside from that, you are gonna just have some additional, like, kind of wider grading limits in order to make the slopes match in, because we are adjusting the road slightly. When I didn't move the center line, this trail was starting to kick out onto private property, which then we'd be into land acquisition and everything in order to fit the trail in. Not in this particular area. I'd have to go back and look at where it was in my notes here. But so alternatively, if we take a look at the option, whoops, I have it open here, with no trail. So starting back over here on the west end, one thing that the city council could consider doing, I don't know that I would invest in reconstructing this existing paved section. Let's say you aren't doing a trail. I wouldn't recommend that you invest reconstructing the part from Lakeside Drive back to County Road 43 in its current location because of its proximity to the pool, even as it exists today. We do know that this property is for sale for development. So, you know, realistically, if a development comes forward, and they do seem to be motivated sellers, we've had a number of different developers look at the property. Part of what their questions were was what's happening with Marsh Lake Road, and as we're developing and increasing certainty from council direction to this date, it'll be easier for them to understand what that looks like. But we could, at the time that this parcel develops, then realistically shift this road over some amount of feet and work to purchase or acquire the property through the development process, and then program the reconstruction of that section of road. This existing road is paved. It's in not great condition, so as part of a project, I would probably recommend we invest some maintenance to this road. So we do some additional patching. You know, we take a look at that a little bit more closely if that was the direction the council was going. But to me, you know, if this was never going to develop, then I think you maybe would want to look at it a little bit differently. But because it's for sale and people have come a-calling about it, you maybe would want to limit the project's end point to be that tying into that existing pavement, and then we figure out how to get it shifted over with or without a trail at some greater point in time. So as you run along the rest of this corridor, and if you put them side by side or had the pleasure, so what I get to look at is cross sections every 50 and 100 feet of what those tie-in points look like. We can really match the existing slopes that are out there and pull these blue grading lines really up close to the road by just tying into the slopes that are there to really make sure that we aren't impacting any trees or impacting any private property improvements that might exist in that area. So even in this area where we had a pretty significant retaining wall, we can just tie into the slope that's there. So the slope that's there is steep today. It'll remain steep, but certainly we could minimize costs by doing that. As we get over by Jeremy's property again, this blue line starts to kick out past these trees, but when I looked at it in detail, it looks to me like we can pull the grading in and not impact any of those trees that are in the roadway easement. We won't know for certain until we get to detailed final design, but whether we have to extend the curb out a little bit further would be something we could consider. So all of these really blue lines, like here, you're seeing blue kick out of the roadway easement, and I do think that we can match at the easement line and not impact what would be private landscaping and whatnot outside of the road edge. driveways would end up tying in, pretty significant, consistently with how they are today. This driveway actually is a little bit of a challenge with the trail. I haven't quite figured out how we do that, because you've got the trail there and their driveway's kind of coming uphill. But that would be a design detail that we'd work through. Same thing with this here. The slopes are steep off the sides of this road, so we'd be just looking to tie them in as close as possible to the existing edge. So then we're really, minimizing the impacts along there. And so when you do that, you end up reducing the costs. So if you go back to what the costs are between the options, that's why you're seeing such a significant difference in cost between the two, because you're really just matching what's there.
To be clear, that 3.5 doesn't include acquisition of the right-of-way though either, does it? Or temp grading, per your.
Correct. So correct. So
So
it doesn't
ballpark?
deal with the west end realignment.
Right. I mean, do you have a ballpark? Is it $500,000 for right-of-way acquisition? I mean, is it 200,000? Do you have any idea?
From the meat cutters property, that
Well,
would be the
for
only place
entire
we would
road.
need it.
That's the only place we'd need it?
If the council authorized shifting the alignment. The rest we figured out we can fit within the current roadway easement. We just would need to possibly pursue some temporary grading easements from property owners. Historically, we haven't paid for temporary grading easements.
Got it. So it's 3.5 million plus.
And
500,000 for the meat cutters, the shifting the road. Would we somehow try to work that into, passing that on to the property? I mean, would the city have any recourse on recovering the cost of that shift?
You're saying don't shift it until it develops, though.
yeah,
Right, but
but I think you'd have to fund the road improvement. I think you'd have a pretty tough case to say that they have to not only accommodate your additional right-of-way, but they also have to build the new road when they have a perfectly good road
Yeah.
already
Not
there
perfectly
to,
good, but
yeah.
I want to be clear. I threw out 500,000. I have no idea if that's anywhere near.
Okay. So is the 2.1 reconstructing the road just to,
The existing surface?
No, we included, since the council had authorized the entire corridor, the cost estimates assume
So it could be
rebuilding the
less.
entire road. Correct, but if you'd still have the expense, it's just you'd defer the expense
later.
to some later point in time.
okay. And then did we,
Okay, let me,
okay,
were you done?
I think the only other thing that I wanted to say was that really what we're asking for tonight, if the council is ready, would be to move for final design for Marsh Lake Road with or without a trail, and maybe provide some direction if you want us to look at vertical and horizontal alignment revisions or any of these other elements. If you're not comfortable making a decision tonight, we certainly could revisit this. My recommendation would be at the first meeting in January, so we don't impact the project schedule. If there's additional things you'd like me to look at between now and then, it would be helpful for you to provide that direction. But with that, then I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Judy, go ahead.
well, I just wanted to check with you because of the RAC residents wanting to move the road north. Would this increase the cost?
Yeah, going back to how much it would, so Mr. Rock is requesting that the road be shifted to the north, adjacent to the house that he owns here and the land he owns here. What he's indicated is that we wouldn't have to purchase the right-of-way in order to accommodate that shift. I would anticipate he would provide the right-of-way in exchange for vacating the existing roadway easement adjacent to his house. The front setback from his house and Vicky's house is pretty close to the existing road, so I think his intent is to move the traffic a little further away from his property. As a rule of thumb, as I indicated earlier, the second you shift the road off the existing alignment by some number of feet, 10, 20, 30, 40 feet, whatever the number is, you are gonna add cost. Are those costs significant or not is subjective. We would have to do a comparative analysis to see what sort of additional grading we'd have to do. So that, you know, if that's something that council is interested in, that's direction you could give us to try to quantify how much are we shifting it and what would that cost be. You do need to remember in the context though of we're also tying into these curves on either end, so we still have to, you know, you gotta tie the road together. You can't just pick up a section and move, so we'd have to do a little bit of design work to see where you'd tie that in.
How many feet does he want to move the road?
He's like 50.
50? 50? And moving north?
Yes. And over here is City Park, so we already have land available here to shift it.
So you could start shifting back here.
If we needed to.
He's asking at the moment, how much would it cost to check that out and come up with a,
My understanding, he's asking for the council to authorize shifting the alignment, but
We would be doing it as a favor to him because he wants more space. Am I
Well,
understanding that?
That's what he's asking.
And I did mention that to him, and he seems to think that it's a safety issue as well, so I don't know, he had Cub Scout meeting tonight, so he couldn't be at two places at once. And I did ask him, I said, if you wanted to do this and it did cost extra, would you be willing to cover that? Because the residents on the rest of the road aren't gonna wanna pay for that. I don't think. They're all shaking their heads no.
what did he say?
I asked him if, basically I said, that from what I understood, there were additional costs to gain geotechnical data, et cetera, besides just moving dirt. Each city area has different soil conditions that would affect the outcome of the construction, so thus affecting the cost. And I said, I will see if Kara can give us a ballpark number if there would be additional costs to move the road and how much she would anticipate them to be. And then he had said he had talked to some road builders, and I asked if he had numbers from the road builders. And are you willing to be assessed for the additional costs to move the road for you if there are any? The road design and its current alignment is within the 30 to 35 mile design standards. So it looks like at this point, moving the alignment would only be a benefit to you. And I said, that's a hard sell, the city and the other residents of Marsh Lake Road, so any additional info on your part would be helpful. And then he did write back quickly that the geotechnical data they took was already in this location. So I don't know if if we have that or not. And the roadway is 66 feet wide now. The area to the side by 50 feet is effectively in the same location as the current geotechnical data they took. There's no difference.
Yeah, but the difference is you'd have to build a new road bed.
Now, we would be rebuilding the road bed in its current configuration, but it's really, picture if you pick it up and you move it 50 feet, well, the area that you've now vacated of a road needs to be graded to tie into the new road, and it needs to be restored with some sort of surface. So do those costs end up being significant? I wouldn't be comfortable throwing out a number without doing some estimate. The only thing I can tell you is that it would be added.
How much of
The only-
an estimate would it be? Do you need a lot of time and effort to come up?
I don't
with
think so. I think our consultant would be able to look at that because they have the county alignment, which is really the alignment that he was more interested in. And so
Because I
would
think
think
that's
they could
what
vet
his
through that
request
without a
is
ton of
just
work.
give them some idea of how expensive this is.
If it's too expensive to do, then we'll know to stay right in the current alignment and not move anything. If it's not gonna be that big of a deal to slide that road up right along through there. I don't think he's gonna donate that property, and then when he has on the side, I guess the grading would be okay, but it would be his yard.
Yeah, I don't think that doing that analysis, I think we could do that analysis by the 13th of
I would think that'd be a
January
reasonable thing to do.
without it being a big
I would agree.
endeavor.
I would say let's.
At least to give you some, I mean, if I'm you, I want some sort of idea of what added cost means.
I would be in favor of looking at doing the analysis. Also, a little bit of consideration that if we were to start to shift it, we would soften that one curve, which is rated at a 35-mile-an-hour curve. Is that
Right here.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could soften that one a little bit. Does that make sense? And when you're reconstructing these roads to a 9-ton road, weren't we bringing in
Bunch of
2 feet of sand?
Because we're not putting new sewer and water lines down the entire length of the road, we think we could, that 1 foot of sand would be sufficient in this area, and still, to meet the 9-ton standard, we wouldn't necessarily need the 2nd foot, so.
Or are we just adding a foot on top of it and raising the bed?
No, we'll be removing everything that's there, bringing in a new section, and there are some areas that we anticipate having to do some soil correction below that 1 foot
So
section.
we're absolutely sure if you only do 1 foot of sand, that you're getting a 9-ton road.
So, yeah, we'll have a design section. Now, certainly, that could be modified in the field. So typically, we'll build in some subgrade correction, we'll build in some contingency in the event that we have to do some additional correction. But yeah, again, I've been working on these roads in this community for a very long time, and the best remedy for our heavy clay soils in order to produce a road that's going to last is to have that sand section underneath there. But we don't want to put any more than we need.
So if we're doing that road construction with the extra sand, I could see there's an added cost, but I don't see it as being astronomical.
Yeah, it might be a reasonable added, particularly when you have a willing landowner. If you didn't have if you had to purchase the land to relocate it, then you'd really be into some more significant dollars. But, that's certainly something we could give you a ballpark on. I'm not going to design both, but at least give you a
Speaking of these shifts,
frame of reference.
getting back to the shift by the pool near the 43 intersection, I mean, hasn't it been established that that intersection is going to have to be rebuilt? Because it'll be problematic with either a roundabout or something, and therefore the intersection is going to have to be rebuilt, and so the road is going to end up being somewhat aligned no matter what.
So what we'll take a look at, if when we start looking at this section more closely with development, we have the county's alignment. Now, if the city were to say, yes, long-term, this is gonna be a county road, then we're probably gonna recommend that we try to acquire the right-of-way for what the county's envisioned alignment was there. They were looking at a 55-mile-an-hour design speed. We would likely kick that down from 55 as a city street. So these curves here, and I don't have the county's design in front of me, but the curves in this location were getting lengthened horizontally because of that 55-mile-an-hour design speed. So we'd take a look at the counties, we'd take a look at a lower design speed, take a look at what we think the right-of-way needs are for a city street, and then fit that all in there and see how it looks. So that's certainly something that, if authorized, we could also have SRF start looking at a little bit more closely if you want to understand how that might shift. Alternatively, we could wait till a developer comes forward and then do the work in conjunction with the developer.
And I'd like that idea better once the developer comes in. We just pave up to the development, and then that road, do the repairs that we need until such time as a developer comes in, and then that can be finished off.
But isn't it, this is, we've had buyers on this reoccurring over time, so
Well,
it's not
there's-
necessarily far in the future that there might be a
Right.
developer.
It could be, next week somebody calls me. The difference is we now have a better idea of what project the city's moving forward, and we got some feedback on the future county road question. So I have more information today than I did 3 weeks ago if a developer were to call. But yeah, realistically, again, starting to dial into that a little bit we're not talking about significant engineering dollars. It's me getting some feedback from SRF and providing some professional judgment.
So I want to talk a little bit about the trail. So there is not any trail currently along this corridor at all.
Correct.
So we would be constructing the first trail, and it just connects at this point on either end of the,
Yeah, there's,
of the corridor, and there's no trail connections that come in
Correct.
at this point.
Now, this trail, Ann would scold me if I didn't note that this trail is part of the county's regional trail system. So the county's plan calls for a 10-foot wide trail along Marsh Lake Road. Now, that was developed in conjunction with the fact that this was also going to be a county road. So, typically we put 10-foot wide trails, not 10-ton, 10-foot wide trails along county roads. Our city standard trail is 8 feet. But yeah, so it ultimately will connect into this trail system that comes up through here. We need some boardwalk up through here. And then Ann's not here, but it ties into the Chaska Trail down to whatever's over here. I'm kind of useless once we hit the
Well,
city
there's a trail
limits.
system going through Lennar's area, isn't it?
Yeah, so the
Which will
city
eventually
has.
come out on Marsh Lake Road as soon as this is developed.
Correct. Now, the city did require the construction of a local trail system through all of these neighborhoods. So there's an existing trail that comes through here that'll tie into Wassermann Park. It weaves its way back through and pops out somewhere, and then it's on road. And then it comes back through here, and then up along here, and then ties into Laketown 10th, and then also back into the school system. So there is
But when
internal
when that's
trails.
developed, there'll be a trail through there, and right now, there's a trail through Wasserman area developments that will go up to Wasserman Park.
Yes,
So you'd be able to go from this trail up to Wasserman Park.
correct.
this whole
Someday.
the whole neighborhood, that
Public
Lennar,
can't see where you're pointing.
the whole neighborhood that Lennar's done has trails in it, so they can get to 43 or 11 through their own neighborhood. They don't have to come down to Marsh Lake Road to do that. Personally, I think we need to wait on that trail because we have other trails that need to be taken care of. And we're not connecting to anything yet.
Yeah, the other thing I didn't note with the no trail option is certainly in these areas where you have undeveloped land, you could shift the responsibility of construction of the trail adjacent to the corridor onto the developer, similar to what we do along County Road 11 and other county corridors, so we can create some more trail gaps through development. But that would be an alternative to start to build that trail network.
I'm from the opposite side of the school of thought here. This trail, if it's not completed and it's done herky-jerky, trail connections, the prices on small trail connections start at $500,000. And we've got a dozen of them, 12, 15 of them identified. Each of them's gonna be probably in that range. So we can only do, in the next couple of years, we can do, in the next 5 years, we can do 1 or 2 trail connections. That's all we can afford. That's separate funding. There's a separate funding for trail connections. There's basically very little separate funding for trails, per se. All the major thoroughfares that this city has built in the last 10 years, 15 years, 86th Street, 78th Street / Cochia, Smithtown Lane, and if you consider County Road 18 or Rolling Hills, we've put in most cases, with the exception of Rolling Hills has a small problem, we put in trails. So we built them in every neighborhood that has a straight thoroughfare that's about this long. 86th Street, 78th Street, Smithtown Lane, they're all about this long. They all have trails that were put in when the street was done. So it is our precedent, and the idea of that you can just save this 1.5 million by not doing the trail right now, I would submit that the cost to doing this trail piecemeal is gonna be a lot more than 1.5 million. Plus, it's gonna come very erratically and very, it'll be almost useless until it's completely done. So I'm not in favor of skipping the trail. I think it's an investment that we have to do, and we have a precedent for doing it. We'll drive down, if you want, we'll drive down all the streets in this town that we've built with trails on them.
I'm in favor of doing a trail as well. I think that we don't want to exacerbate a problem that we already have in the city by not doing a trail, and it will always be more expensive to come back and do it again.
I'd say it's twice as expensive.
And there's nothing more frustrating than not spending your tax dollars wisely.
Well, the trail connections that aren't getting done, those are costing more and more all the time too. So how do you justify that?
We've set up an accounting mechanism to save money for the trail connections.
Well, we could take that $1.5 million and do 3 trail connections.
It
We can't
doesn't,
just divert this money
you can't.
to trail connections.
We could just spend it in different places, what Judy is suggesting.
Yeah, I should note that the budget only includes 2.5 million, so you would need an additional million from somewhere else in the budget
So
for the trail.
That's a capital budget, though. It's not, is there 2.5 million sitting in some account somewhere? No.
No,
So it's
she's proposing a bond for the
Right,
project.
so it's a plan. It's not a budget that's hard-coded.
So I've been sitting here listening to this discussion. I think we need to step back for a second and remember what the objective here was. When this council unanimously voted to keep it a city road, the discussions all at that time was, I think there's 2 key points that I think is worth repeating now. Number one is this is a temporary road in the sense that eventually it will become a county road. 20, 30 years, at some point in the future, it'll become a county road. Therefore, if we start putting in, we did agree on a 9-ton road, but if we start putting in all of these additional things we put in the trail, that stuff is probably, for the most part, going to be ripped out in 20 years. The other thing, too, is we talked about, at least I talked about, where as development goes south out of Victoria and properties connect up to Marsh Lake Road, at that time, we can always direct staff to enter into negotiations with developers to acquire additional right-of-way to provide room for future road, because the road will have to be improved at some point. The same thing goes for the south side, where it's Laketown Township. As the annexation occurs, we can negotiate additional right-of-way at that point, where we're not trying to force the acquisition, but we can pick it up. And I cite as an example, just west of Jeremy Rock's property, we've already got a berm built, and there's been no formal road design. Don't we have a berm and a part of that? If you'd point that out on the map. So this has already been done without a road design. And last Monday, this council voted not to complete that road design. So the point I'm getting to is I don't think we should put the trail in. I don't think we should do the berm, the lights, or anything else, simply because of the cost. And this road was designed to get us to the point where 20 years from now we can either improve it because the growth will require it. At that time, it could be sanitary sewer, it could be by that time, we may also have a lot more of the land acquired. And I want to minimize the cost here. I simply want to, if I could convince this council to do it, I don't even want to do a 9-ton road. This road's been driven on for 50 years. I just want to pave it where it exists right now. I'm also concerned that if we acquiesce and spend the taxpayers' money because one resident asked to have the road moved, what are we going to tell the residents on the west end when they come in and say, well, I want you to look at this too? That doesn't make a lot of sense here. That road was there when they bought the house. I think what we ought to do is minimize the costs here wherever possible, pave the road and be done with it, knowing full well that in 20 years this is all going to be redone, or 20, 25 years. At least at that point, they'll have a better sense for growth, development, and need, because there's still debate and argument as to whether or not the traffic flow is going to warrant a county road at that time. And as part of this process, I think last Monday, I think we actually ought to, if in fact we keep it a city road and we've got the comp plan that goes out 20 years, and we're going to build some sort of a road at least for 20 years, we should actually go back and revisit the fact that we voted not to change the comp plan, and I actually voted for that. And in retrospect, I think we need to change it. I think we need to tell the county that, no, we're going to keep this a city road, at least for the next, in this comp plan, which is 20 years. But we're not going to change that. We've already decided that. So I disagree. I think we need to minimize the actual costs here. And to Councilmember Black's comments, the $1.5 million, give or take, that would be put into putting a trail on just this road, based on the budget discussion earlier tonight from Trish. I can't remember the figures exactly, but I think the first 3 priorities that came out of the Park and Rec, which admittedly this council hasn't decided on yet, but if you took, I think the total cost of all of those, as I did a quick addition in my head, was like a little over $1 million. So we're talking about $1.5 million for a trail here that we're going to rip out in 20 years, or we can spend a little bit less money and actually make 3 trail connections where they need to be made already. So, council comments? Mr. Gregory?
Thank you. I tend to agree with Councilmember Vogt and Councilmember McMillan that building a trail now is probably cheaper than trying to piecemeal it in later. However, last week, I think the county made it pretty clear they still want to keep their foot in the door as keeping this in their Comp 2040 plan as a county road. So they haven't given up on it, and we did direct staff to talk to them. So we're kind of going on a little bit of a dual track mode here. And I would like to hear them out to see what their thoughts are as far as making this into a county road at some point in the future. I did agree to a 9-ton road because I think this road will be here for a significant amount of time. And the notion of, and I agree with the mayor, if we were to spend all this money to put this trail and build all of these retaining walls, there is a good chance that at some point the county would want to reconstruct this and build their county road system. At that point, all of that would be ripped out. So I'm a little bit torn, but I would like to hear the county out a little bit and see what they are proposing as far as keeping their foot in the door as making this into a county road. But as of tonight, if we had to make a decision, I would go without a trail.
All right, so who's going to pay the costs that we're going to spend because of Jeremy Rock's request? Do you think the taxpayers, let's focus on that one issue right now. Should the taxpayers pay for that? And doesn't that set a dangerous precedent for other homeowners when they don't like the alignment of a road someplace?
I think he's asking, Mr. Mayor, he's asking us to ballpark the cost that would be and then pursue discussion after that.
Right, that's what he's asking, but there's cost associated with that. So are we willing to bear that, shift that cost to the taxpayer?
The
And then what
cost
do
to just to find the answer, is that?
Correct. And then we don't, I mean, was it 50 grand, 100 grand, 2,000, 200,000? We don't know how much it would cost to move the road and actually put the road bed up there. My point is, do we actually do that for a single resident that asked to have it moved? right? If what's to say the people in the West End aren't going to come back and say, well, I want you to move it here, what's it going to cost to move it here too, right? So I just think we open up a dangerous precedent that every time we get another request, are we going to go ahead and tell that resident then, okay, we'll go spend money and look at that request too? At some point, we have to make a decision here. I asked before the meeting tonight, we've spent, we, the city that is, between SRF and Focus Engineering, this has been going on since 2016. I know just after I was sworn in, I can't remember if it was January or February of 17, I was presented with a plan for the West End, the meat cutters property, that showed the road completely redone, which would have solved all of the problems on the west end of the road that we're dealing with here tonight, and this whole question about Marsh Lake Road. Why that development was allowed to go in as it was built, I can only think that this was, everybody had said, yeah, we're going to move this road, but that never occurred. It makes me wonder how I was able to, I was actually provided diagrams that showed the road moved with a whole new development in there on that Marsh Lake Road property, almost if it was a done deal. Well, it wasn't a done deal. So, and that was 3 years ago. We've had all sorts of people look at the Marsh Lake property. We don't know what's going to happen down there. I'm just opposed to putting any more money into Marsh Lake Road beyond what's required to pave it and get it so that we can use it for, or we, and the public can use it for 20 years. If you want a 9-ton road and it's not going to cost that much, that's the estimate, fine, I can agree to that. But I think the trail and any other adjustments is just added cost that we throw away in 20 years. To Councilmember Black's point, I think we could spend, if we're going to spend and decide to do that, we don't have funds for any of this, but if we're going to borrow money and go work on trails, to me, if we fix those, do we have a hard copy packet? Do we know how much those 3 trails were that was in Trish's presentation earlier?
The hard copy is over there.
All right, for sake of argument, we'll just say it was like,
2 trails.
there were 3 in the budget. For sake of argument, let's just say it was 1.2 million. So a little bit of less money for connecting 3 trails versus building 1 trail that doesn't connect on either end in who knows how long it's going to take before it actually connects. I'd rather connect the 3 trails for less money, and that benefits probably a lot more residents in sheer number of homes and neighborhoods than this 1 trail where we have, maybe a dozen homes along Marsh Lake Road. So, yeah, I'm opposed to the trail. I want to keep the cost as low as possible.
What's the lifespan of the 9-ton road that we anticipate?
So typically, people will talk about roads with a 20-year design life. So that would be typical. We are seeing roads that have our sand section underneath it are performing longer. So the base itself, we hope to get 50 years out of it. For the roads that we've built new in the new neighborhoods, we're hoping to not have to revisit that base for 50 years, but only have to revisit the gravel and the asphalt on the top.
So it's effectively up to a 50-year life.
Yeah.
I think
With the 9-ton.
all the discussion we heard at the last meeting, especially from the residents that having done their research, is that, you know, the likelihood of needing a county road is not 20 years off, it's 30 years, 40 or 50. So we should build something that's going to last. You know, and are we waiting 30, 40 years to get a trail? I go back to beating this thing to death. Our precedent is that we put the trail in when we do a road.
Well, the other thing too, Councilmember Black pointed out, all of those neighborhoods in Victoria, they're all connected to the trail system through the neighborhoods. So it's not like they're not connected already. The only difference is that we just don't have a trail along Marsh Lake Road.
This one will be connected in 2 places. It'll be connected through Lennar, and it's connected to the Wassermann neighborhood.
Right, but if we don't build a trail, they can still get to downtown and they're still connected to the trail system. They just don't have a trail along Marsh Lake Road.
That'll put those people on the roads then, and now it's a safety issue.
The bikes of the Marsh Lake Road residents?
No, anybody who wants to go on, get to the other trail system.
No, they can go through the neighborhoods.
they can't go through the neighborhoods and get to Pioneer Trail to go into Chaska. These bikers go everywhere.
Well, they do. I just don't think that the 1.5 million is worth it. If we're going to spend 1.5 million on trails, I just think we can get more bang for the buck in other parts of the city. So, and I think we have to take a bird's eye view of this, right? I'd love to be able to build a trail. I supported it at first. I wanted to look at the cost too, but now that we have the cost, I just think it's cost prohibitive. So we have to make some decisions here tonight, and we clearly have a split in the council, which is fine. Do we have resolutions with this, Karen?
No.
All right, so I don't want to cut off discussion if there's further discussion, but if not, then we need to make some decisions, and in order to do so, I would ask that we have a motion on if a council member wants to make a decision. So I want to bring one thing up, and that is I move that we actually do amend the comprehensive plan to annotate Marsh Lake Road as a city road. Is there a second?
A second.
All right, we have a valid second. Discussion on this? All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Nay.
All right, so that motion now carries 3-4, 2 against.
3, 2.
3.
Right, 3-4, 2 against.
Oh.
So,
Not the number 4?
yeah. So the motion does carry. We are going to modify the comprehensive plan to annotate Marsh Lake Road as a city road. Would another council member like to make another motion related to this?
Did you want to do that?
Do you want a motion to authorize final design for Marsh Lake Road? I make a motion to authorize final design for Marsh Lake Road with a trail.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second that motion.
Discussion. The council, is there any further discussion? Marsh Lake Road?
Question, Kara. We've got $500,000 in retaining walls here.
Yeah.
That's a big number, and you mentioned that we may not need hardly any of those.
I don't know, maybe half. But it really depends on the landowners, so I don't want to presuppose. The landowners are just seeing the alignment
Right.
for the first time, so we haven't had any conversation about that.
I had a question
Go ahead.
about that. With those retaining walls, is that going to affect the farm equipment?
Yeah, certainly, if we were moving forward with the trail, we'd want to spend some time with the landowners in all of those areas. And that would be typical as part of a final design process. We would meet with the adjacent landowners and take a look at if they're willing to let us grade. We'd have to show them how much we'd need to grade to avoid the walls. Our goal, of course, would be to minimize walls at all costs because they're expensive and somebody's got to maintain them. So the first goal is to not have them, but sometimes they're unavoidable.
Further discussion? Okay, so we have a valid motion for authorizing final design for Marsh Lake Road with a trail. Is that correct, Deb?
Yes.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed signify by saying nay. Nay.
No.
Motion does not carry. It fails 3-2. I move that we authorize final design for Marsh Lake Road as a 9-ton road without a trail. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Nay.
Motion carries 3-2. Cindy, you have that? Okay, Kara, is there other issues or related to Marsh Lake Road that we need to discuss?
Based on the motion, so just so there's clarity on my mind, we would be proceeding with final design as it was presented here tonight. If the council wishes to direct us to add any additional scope from these items listed here, like alignment revisions, I'd be looking for specific direction for that if there's something the council wants us to look at.
So, council, is there anything that anybody wants to make a motion or add any additional guidance to
One
Kara?
question, Kara, how much would it cost to get an estimate to realign the road by Jeremy Rock's place?
I don't think a lot of money. I mean, I don't, we're talking about a couple hours of,
Okay.
a handful of hours from SRF, a hour or two of my time to review that work, so.
So let me I want a point of clarity. Only a few hours to be able to give the council an estimate on what it would cost to act, assuming they agreed to realign the road. Okay, so it's only a few hours then?
No,
All
yeah,
right,
and that's
that's a little bit
information I
different.
certainly would anticipate being able to bring back at the next council meeting that you then could provide direction on
Whether to.
early in the final design process where it wouldn't, you know,
Okay,
result
so
in wasted.
based on previous discussion, and council jump in if I'm wrong, 4 of you supported, and if it's only a few hours, I'll support it too. And so without objection from the council, go ahead and get an estimate on the cost to move the road north as requested by Jeremy Rock. And you said that's only a few hours, right?
Correct.
So the costs are, all right, instant.
Not-
One other thing just popped in my head that I think we have to do here in the council, we need a vote on it. And that is, because we changed tonight the comprehensive plan to a city road, I believe we now need to direct staff that during the, either during the annexation process or during the development process on the Victoria side, that we actually direct city staff to work with county staff. Before the process, because it was always a county road, that was included. Now it's not, since we have a disconnect. So therefore, I move that we direct city staff during the development process on the Victoria side and the annexation process on the Lake Township side to work with county as part of that process for development of acquiring right-of-way. Can I get a second to that motion, please?
Second.
Discussion. The reason I made that motion is because before it was automatic, as long as the council kept the plan to say it was a county road. The fact that we changed that to a city road tonight, we need this motion in order to direct staff to still continue discussions with the county as we do the acquisition, hence the motion. So that was why I made the motion. Council, any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that motion carried unanimously. Cindy, did you get that? Kara, is there any other guidance then? Anything else you need from the council?
Not unless the council wants to provide any other guidance on any of these issues. I have what I need, but if
Okay.
you want me to look at any of these other things, I would prefer to be directed to do.
Point of discussion, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
Can we find out from anyone how long changing the comprehensive plan takes?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a process you'll have to go to the Met Council and undergo a certain
Yeah.
process.
Councilmember vote, mayor, members of the council, yes, there's certainly a process to go through, so it's very prescriptive, and I don't have that information in front of me, but yeah, it will take some time, and we've got the direction here, and we can begin that process, so.
Would you be, when you get a chance, I know the holidays are coming up, would you get some more information to answer council member Boat's question and just distribute it to the council members?
Yes, happy to do that.
Does that work?
Yep.
All right. Council, is there anything further? Okay, that wraps up 2.4. The next item, 2.5, authorize change order number 1 for well siting study Phase 2 borings. Kara, because you haven't had enough to say.
And apparently I've developed a cough again, which seems to happen when I have to talk a lot. Okay, so we are still in the same area of town. We're talking about our well siting study. So the council had a detailed workshop on October 14th where our consultant reviewed it. Really provided a background refresher on the potential water supply within our South Growth area, as well as our initial findings associated with the well siting study. So just to recap, Trout has completed 4 well borings to date at locations I'll show you where in a minute. So the results of those borings indicated that we would have the potential to supply 500 to 700 GPM of water from a screened well in the Jordan Aquifer in those areas. But really what we're after is 1,200 GPM. So our south growth area, we want to have 4 1,200 GPM wells that serve our south growth area. There's an additional treatment plant planned in that area. If we're only getting 500 GPM out of a well, we're going to need twice as many wells. And there's costs associated with the construction of the wells, the maintenance of the wells, and the connection of those water supplies. So that certainly isn't ideal. However, BAR, as was started to be indicated at that meeting, BAR did take a look at the information that we have available and is recommending that we pursue one additional boring in the location shown here as number 6 in this general location. The other borings were completed, these blue dots, on the Gestock and Welter properties. So they're, based on what they found there, they're requesting that we do one more boring.
Real quick, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yep.
Number 2 was never drilled?
Correct, because the findings of 3 were unfavorable, they directed us to go north instead of south. So
Right.
3 was removed and 5 was added. So originally we were doing 1, 2, 3, 4, but after we did 1 and 3, they said don't do 2, we added 5, so we just swapped 2 for 5. But now they want us to add a 5th location, which is location number 6, even though it's the 5th location.
Let's, just for, I know I
That's okay.
interrupted you. Let's say number 6 finds enough flow, right? Then we'd have to pipe all of the water down throughout the southern part of the city?
Yeah, so what we're hoping to find with location number 6 is something better than number 5, so we could proceed with well number 5 to accommodate development. It still doesn't answer our question of how we really want to take a look at providing water for the entire south growth area. So simultaneously to that work, we have initiated conversations with Chaska and Carver to gain information about what they're doing outside of our city limits to see, if they're not having supply issues, should we be purchasing water from them, doing some sort of joint project? We're in the early stages of those discussions. They're providing me with their water supply plan information so we can take a look at their system relative to our needs. The other thing that I just wanted to note too, the church, the Westbrook Community Church is located at the intersection of 10 and 11, and that's going to be constructed at that intersection, and they need to provide sprinkler protection, so they need some pretty significant water supply. I had a conversation with the pastor on Friday, and then we'll be circling back to BAR to see if we want to combine efforts in any sort of way. It might be as simple as we get an opportunity to observe their well when they do the boring to find out if there's additional information there, or BAR may say, yeah, we should investigate that even further. So on the big picture front, we are going to continue to do work, but meanwhile, we do have development pressure in this area that by the time we get a couple hundred homes online, we are going to need additional water supply. So we do want to continue to move forward. If six doesn't produce a better result than 5, then I suspect we'll be looking at 5 for the location of well number 5. And those wells take a little bit of time to construct and get online, so we do want to keep moving forward in order to be able to provide more answers to the developers.
All right, so tonight you're asking us to approve 6.
Correct. So what that would be, and I actually need to go back to the packet because I didn't word it correctly in my slide, but approving change order number 1, thereby increasing the contract amount by $49,925 and extending the project completion date to May 16th. The well driller will get us on their schedule, but we wanted to make sure we had enough time in the change order to get the work completed.
So that $49,000, almost $50,000 is for one more boring.
Correct. Yes.
How much water did you say number 5 could produce?
I believe that was in that 500 to 700 range.
So we're going to need another well quicker than we would have had we found
Correct.
the higher volume.
Correct. We'll pretty quickly need to be continuing to look at our comprehensive water plan and what those triggers are. And, we've been operating under an assumption of 4 1,200 GPM wells spaced out over a number of years. This information is going to cause us to need to relook at.
So 2.5, we had the money to pay in cash.
Correct.
Well, number 5, we're gonna have to borrow?
It was a combination for the
Both.
$4
So then,
million
well, After that,
project.
we're gonna have to borrow for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we'll want to, so as part of the rate study that's ongoing, we'll take a look at, we'll have, updated information. We'll take a look at the projection of timing of wells in the future water treatment plant, and that analysis will roll into the rate study to determine what core fees, water availability charges, and rates should be to accommodate that future demand. So the timing, it's good that we're learning this information in conjunction with doing the rate study.
All right, council, question, or was that it, Kara?
Yes.
Council questions? Discussion?
Are they going to look at the church property?
Yeah, so separately from this change order authorization with Trout for well drilling, we'll continue to work with Barr on these other questions, and I will be sending them a graphic showing where that property is and bringing them up to speed on what opportunity might be there. So I spoke with the church on Friday and need to relay that information to Barr yet.
Was he open to that?
Yes, he called me after being at the the Victoria Works open house. He chatted with some subset of you and called me.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it was
Looks like
helpful.
he's close to water over there.
All right. I will make a motion to approve change order number 1, thereby increasing the contract amount to $49,925 and extending the project completion date to May 16th, 2020.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, that wraps,
I think he got locked.
Somebody locked out.
Nope,
We're
hang
here
on a
so
sec.
long, the door locked.
Must have self-locked. Okay, that completes the special meeting agenda. There's two last items. Roundtable real quick. I want to find out if the council has any objections to adding to our legislative agenda, letter to legislators on changing the open meeting law based on what our city has experienced before and the Supreme Court case. I think there's changes to be made to that. And without objection from the council, I'd like to draft up some of those suggested changes, get them drafted in a letter by Dana, and then allow each of you to see those changes. And then we can bring this back at another time to talk about it. But I'd like to get a draft letter, at least or a letter drafted rather, for the council to consider as far as potential changes.
Question, do we have others who are joining in with us on this legislation? Is this going to be part of our legislative agenda from the League of Minnesota Cities?
We had, what was it, 3 items, correct? Dana, that the council approved in the last meeting as far as legislative priorities,
Yeah,
right? This would be a 4th one for our city, so there's not other cities that I'm asking us to join with. I'm asking this city to add that item to our list. But I don't want you to add it blindly. I want to have Dana draft a letter that each of you can look at, and then we can bring it up for discussion at a later time.
I'd like to see what would be on the letter, because I know one of the items, Mr. Mayor, that you were discussing with the league is something I disagree with, so.
That's fine. That's why I want to, so you have something that you can look at instead of just arbitrarily agreeing to something without.
Right.
All right, so without objection?
No objection.
All right, Dana, I'll work with you and draft something that we can then bring back to the council for them to take a look at. All right, there's nothing else, so there's no reports on a special meeting like this. So at this point, I ask for a motion for adjournment, please.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, please.
second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Wow.